The last time Andy saw her home planet, she'd been a 14-year-old girl with tears in her eyes and her best friend's blood on her hands. By sheer mercy, she'd been able to escape her death sentence. After that, she'd made her way out into the galaxy and traveled through worlds she'd never known, unsure of who she was, where she was going, or who she would have to become to survive. The only thing certain was the whisper of death, a monster made of fear and fury that followed her no matter how far she tried to go. Many nights, Andy stayed awake, looking over her shoulder, terrified that General Cortus would send men from her planet to come and lock her away. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another casual episode of the SBU English Club podcast, the best critique group that nobody asked for. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Jay Podcast from Podcast.
And we have another darling in store today. We have actually received a book from two members at once. Sasha Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings have submitted their novel-length work, Zenith, for our consideration and critique.
We've had two novels from the same author, but now we have one novel from two authors.
Right. So I'm sure if you've been following us, you were actually expecting possibly a different sci-fi YA
disaster,
controversial disaster. That's a good word for it. But my little heart couldn't take it, and I couldn't make time to go to Jay and give them the other copy. So I thought this one would be fun. This is a quintessential English Club podcast book. There's no drama. There's no stress. This is just a very, very bizarre and ill-conceived book that has a lot of heart and has a lot to offer the amateur writer.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, I guess, cautionary tale.
It is absolutely like a cautionary sort of like fable. And I feel like ever since Nova's Playlist, honestly, we've had this back-to-back string of like controversial books where in some ways the book's context like eats up as much energy as the book itself.
Right.
And we'll be back to that shortly, but
we will be so back.
In the meantime, we have this very well-intentioned sort of doomed vessel of a book.
Right. Like a spaceship made of glass.
Sort of like a spaceship made of glass with metal hands that work like a shield.
Yeah, so this is just our beach episode. There's no drama, there's no plot development. We're just going to be having a good little slice of life time here at the English Club meeting room today.
There'll be lots of frames that you can screenshot and use as a desktop background where all the characters are smiling and hitting a beach ball or perhaps smashing a watermelon.
Yeah, that's what me and Jay are doing right now, if you can't picture it.
Yeah, we're giggling a lot, although you can't hear it for some reason.
But on a serious note, this is like another one of those books that I consider foundation to SBU as a project. Several years ago, I was like watching a Caleb Joseph video on this and just yelling at the screen because he was being so mean and uncharitable. It's kind of like with Handbook for Mortals. I'm like, guys, I've written this book. Jay, you have written this book. We have had this book come into our real life critique group so many times. This is just someone's first book, and it has a lot of things going for it that I think are really interesting, but also a lot of fatal flaws that we can learn from and explore in a constructive and kind-hearted way.
It's really interesting because it's one person's first book, but then it's the other person's sort of like writerly crisis.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a vent art project, and we'll talk about that more later. But it's
I have theories on the ratio of which author was more involved in the writing process.
I would be really interested to hear those because I honestly couldn't detect the moments where like the writer like switched. Like I couldn't tell if there was any kind of pattern or anything. There's definitely like a different intensity of subject matter at times, but like on the whole, their voices are really similar, which I was honestly pretty impressed by.
Yeah, it's not like, they traded off chapter by chapter. That lack of seams between the chapters, I actually kind of feeds into my theory, but this is just a silly book, and I'm just so relieved. I can't say that enough. It's not like J.A. Johnstone where it's launched me into this paranoid, like, rabbit hole. It's not Lauren M. Davis. These guys, I don't think these guys are problematic. They've dropped off the face of the planet. Either like not produced anything or stayed in their own lanes and just published a book here or there afterwards, but like they don't post on YouTube anymore. I can't find them on other socials. This just feels like fertile ground.
Lindsay Cummings is definitely still around. For anybody who doesn't know, Lindsay Cummings is like an established author and Sarah Alsberg is like a former booktuber. And so Lindsay Cummings is definitely still around. I looked her up earlier today actually, and like she has a book coming out next year and she has published a few books since this, so I think she's really stayed in her lane, like you said.
Yeah, so it's just really nice to go into a book without preemptively being mad at them for everything. So without further ado, I think we can jump right in.
Hey guys, just a quick content warning before we jump into the episode. This book contains instances of both consensual non-consent or ambiguously consensual non-consent, as well as just regular old non-consensual sexual scenarios. So if that is not something that you are interested in, I would encourage you to either give this one a miss or skip around in the episode whenever that topic comes up. There are lots of places where we are not talking about that, but there are a few, I would say, fairly well telegraphed chunks where we begin to talk about that. Thanks so much. See you around campus. All right, Andrew. So we both read the entire book, but we did split up the summary, and you agreed to take the first half, for which I am extremely grateful because it contains the bulk of the book's flashbacks,
Yes.
Which I'm sure will come up in later sections of this episode as well.
Yep.
But if you don't mind, do you want to lead us into the first half of the summary of Zenith by Sarah Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings, the Androma saga, number 1 of how many were there? 3? 2?
I think there's 2. I have Nexus. I don't have any other books in the series. I think it's just a duology.
Number 1. Princesses of Earth, Volume 1.
But I want to thank you because I found the second half so annoying and headache-inducing that this is actually much easier for my little mind to comprehend. So we will dive right into it. There's actually a lot in this book. It's like 500 pages, which is crazy for a book of this literary caliber, we'll say.
It never met a word it didn't like, this book.
That's good. I gotta remember that one. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, specifically the Mirabel galaxy, there was a loose alliance of 5 systems called the Unified Systems. Most of these don't matter. All you really need to know is that one of them is just especially shitty. So shitty that Zenith, which is its capital planet, ?
I think so.
The only planet, the main planet of this system, rose up to rebel/conquer the other systems in a conflict called the Cataclysm. More on the book's word choices later, but the conflict, it was like within living memory of the adult characters. So this is like within the past couple decades or whatever. The Cataclysm ended in the defeat of Zenith, so now that planet and the entire Olin system that it inhabits are just shunted out of the Unified Systems. But forget everything I just told you because none of that really matters at the end of the day. Just there's the Unified System and then there's Zenith, and Zenith is the bad guys. We open our novel with one of those really annoying prologues that just lists proper nouns without any context. It's actually a lot. The focus here is on this guy, Valen Cortas, trying to remember the Ravina Mountains of his home planet Arcadius as he's tortured on Lunamir, the prison moon of Zenith. Do you see how annoying it is to get all of these in a couple sentences?
It is honestly so validating to have you call that out right off the bat, because I was scared that if I did it, you were going to be like, nah, poet brain, you're not used to reading sci-fi anymore, you're out of the game, you're washed up. But no, it actually was annoying.
It was annoying, and like I guess I have a higher tolerance than your average Joe. Maybe I don't, like, if you're like super into spec fic, this is probably not as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be. But something I'm going to keep bringing up came from our Noah Man of Destiny episode about suxposition, which is just saying this is like this thing, this is how it is, suck it, this is my world. That's not really happening here. We're just getting people's names and places' names, and without the context, I think, is the operative part, because this guy's like actively being tortured, and he's just like, oh yes, the Ravina Mountains in my home planet Arcadius. And I'm like, maybe I'll be okay with Lunamir, I'm okay with Valen Cortus, but like, I don't need all this stuff right now. Like, if you're going to do a prologue, which you shouldn't, but I digress. Mm-hmm. All we get here, other than Valen's name, is the refrain, I am Valen Cortas. Vengeance will be mine. Against whom he wants vengeance is, at the moment, unclear. From here, we shift focus to Androma Rosella, my original character Do Not Steal. She has white and purple hair and metal wrist cuffs from her tragic backstory, and metal cheekbones, because as we all know, that is the most strategic part of her body to defend. Mm-hmm. Like, these are like defensive body modifications that she gets on her cheekbones. She also, Jay, you'll love this as an Elden Ring fan, she dual wields katanas, which are more like lightsabers, or I guess vibro swords if you're into the EU.
They're respect to have electric damage.
Right. And then for every kill she makes, she etches a new tally on the blades, like she's Cold Steel the Hedgehog.
Hell yeah.
And she's the most feared space pirate, outlaw, mercenary thing in all of the galaxy.
In all of Mirabel.
And they call her the Bloody Baroness, a murderess, and a captain-ess of the Marauder, the most feared ship in all of the galaxy.
They are so insistent on the... No, we'll just leave it.
I'll say it. They're very cisnormative with their word choices.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. It's a very binaristic sort of gender setup in this world, which, not to be a soy lib, but I did sort of feel like in space, where there's lots of probable biological configurations that could be possible, and therefore many different social constructs that could emerge. I felt like having this like very boys are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of energy was a little bit... It did break my immersion at times, but...
Right.
Yeah.
But anyways, she's also, to her crew, Andy, a super sensitive and pretty girl who loves her crew and has really deep feelings about all the killing she does constantly to survive.
Yeah.
She has this like duality in her, and the rest of her crew also has it.
Andy, when she's killing people, is like that black and white picture of that guy like grinning, and then Andy, when the people are dead, is like that same black and white picture of the guy frowning.
Yeah, exactly. She's got a lot going on. Andy's a literal child, and then her crew is also made up of literal children who are also fearsome murderers. And literally in chapter 1, they go round robin and describe each individual crew member's appearance, backstory, and their arch personalities. I will spare you the gory details because with a couple of these, it literally does not matter. Mm-hmm. But there is Lyra, who is the second in command. I got Spock vibes from her at first, but I think that was done away with by the end of the book. She's definitely like the more emotionally mature center. She's the pilot. When the plot needs her to be, she's more mature, but it kind of comes and goes. She chews Moon Chew, camel-cased Moon Chew, which I just kind of pictured as Zins. Like she is just like an 18-year-old. She also has weird things on her cheek like Andy, but these are organic. They are scales that change color with her mood and can grow so hot that they burn things.
Well, Andrew, fun fact about me that you may not know is that my eyes actually change color with my mood and also with the weather. So
with the weather,
we're not so different, Lyra and I.
Ever since I broke my elbow, I do kind of get twinges every time it starts to rain. So is that my like alien power?
Yeah, that's your mutant power.
Right. So there's also Breck, who is a giant S who is like bulletproof and 7 feet tall or whatever. And there's also Gilly, who is a tiny 13-year-old S who shoots people. They literally have no identity outside of being in the Marauder crew. Breck literally has plot-convenient amnesia. Like, they just said, oh, no one knows where Breck came from. Not even she remembers. Well, they know her home planet because she's, like, of a certain species. But, like, no one knows where she actually came from. So I'm assuming that's for book 2.
I assume so.
One's big, one's little, with a name like Breck. You can guess which one's the big one. Don't worry about them too much.
Yeah, Gilly is like, if you've been playing Zenless Zone Zero, I think Gilly is sort of analogous to like the spunky like hammer girl. She's just sort of like a weapons master who's like small and like makes quips. Not that they don't all make quips, but she makes like a lot of them.
Not to get into my critiques right now, but this is our crew. We're supposed to be comparing this to Firefly or Guardians of the Galaxy or even just Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which one of these is the mechanic? If something breaks...
It's definitely Lyra. She's definitely the Lyra. Captain and the mechanic.
There was no like grease monkey, and that if you're gonna have all these archetypes... Like, that's the one that you would have for a spaceship. So I was kind of disappointed by that. I thought it would be Gilly because she's, like, tiny and can fit in things, but that's just
her little arms can fit inside all the panels and stuff.
Right?
She's gonna lose a finger like a child in, like, a textile mill in 1912.
Jesus Christ! But yeah, so in speaking of, like, the comparisons we're supposed to be making, it's hard to draw on those because all of these people... act and treat each other like actual children.
Yeah.
Which, on one hand, is realistic because they are actual children, but there's really not a lot of work put into the we kill people all the time thing to square that with the we're all still sensitive children thing. Mm-hmm. Other than very basic lip service, it just kind of vacillates depending on the current need.
Yeah.
So we have all these girls being like, oh, haha, you're waking me up in the middle of the night. What's going on? But like, they're also like, they just got done with a mission where they were murdering people.
Yeah.
So... interesting, but also I feel like kind of mishandled off the bat.
Agree, yeah. Mishandled is exactly the word that came to mind for me as well. It just feels like it's trying to be like funny and quirky and like snacky in terms of its like genre and tone, but like the level of trauma that it inflicts on its characters would like it kind of necessitates, at least for me, like a more serious like degree of like handling of the material that's just not really there. But yeah, I'm skipping into my critiques as well, so we'll back off of that.
Right. So I'm going to be honest, this might completely derail my entire analysis and critique, but for the rest of this entire book, I just imagine these characters as girls at a sleepover playing pretend, which made everything so much more tolerable. Like, none of the male characters or the adult characters are real. These are just like 4 really socially maladjusted weird girls who are all hanging out with each other. I invite you to do the same, dear listener, for your own sanity.
Wait, Andrew, if that was true, I would actually really like this a lot.
Right? It's like, yeah. It's like, I don't know, like, I find that so much more charming. And like, Zenith as a concept, I find more charming because of the youth that this was written with, to put it positively. Mm-hmm. So it just all kind of gave like sleepover weird girl vibes. So just keep that in your heart as we continue with this book. Sorry, I digress. After getting our introductions out of the way, our anti-heroes are attacked by Unified System patrol ships. Remember, that's like the
law.
Yeah, that's the law. Those are the cops or whatever. So they are low on fuel and weapons after their previous mission, but they attempt to escape their pursuers in an asteroid field, only for the action to be interrupted by one of many POV shifts. You see, my dear Jay, this is when we learn that this is a mid to late 2010s book, which means that it has to have a million, billion, golly gee drillion close third POVs from every goddamn character that could possibly exist. The first one up is Claren.
Yep.
I do not care who Claren is. Her chapters are barely intelligible and entirely in italics because they take place in the past. And Rich Shapiro has ruined the concept of italics for me. So I couldn't do it. I'm sorry. You can fully read the whole book without the Claren chapters, but I'll give you like the spark notes. All these do is list proper nouns. There's talk about the yielding and the conduit. I've read this entire book, and I do not know what the yielding or the conduit is. Jay doesn't seem to either.
No, I'm shaking my head right now. I did not understand what was going on there.
The narrative doesn't tell you this right off, but I don't give a shit, so I'm just going to dive right into it. Clarin is the mother of the current queen of Zenterra, who are the bad guys. So for some reason, we need like these decade prior POV chapters from the antagonist's mom.
And I think the real reason for that will not be revealed until the very end of my section, so stay tuned.
Right.
I think it's really just because they needed a way to explain a certain plot detail that becomes relevant in literally the book's final pages, so...
God. Back to the action. It turns out that this patrol is headed by a capital G guardian named Dex, who is Androma's, like, ex-boyfriend or whatever. They had, like, a weird fling, and that romantic tension is there right off. He just exudes embittered ex-boyfriend energy. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't like him online, but I found him very charming. Again, this is probably because of my horrible mind, because like I pictured all the protagonists being children. I pictured this guy as Knuckles the Echidna. In his first scene, Once and Never Done Again, he has these gloves with red triangular blades that come out of the knuckles that he uses to threaten his underlings. So I'm like, okay, that's Knuckles the Echidna. That's who he's going to be for me for now on. But like maybe like the Ken Penders version.
Yeah, at first he seems like a cross between Knuckles and, like, Darth Vader or something.
Yeah.
The way that he's, like, like, he's not part of the military hierarchy, but, like, he has enough authority to threaten them. I was like, oh, this is very, like, Vader from A New Hope or something like that. But he's not like that at all.
Oh, God, not to get into Kate Corain already, but do you think these people were, like, Raylos? Because this was 2018. That was, like, pretty peak Raylo.
True.
God,
it could be.
It. Okay. Anyways.
It could be. If so, I wish that Vader side of him had been like more prevalent, because I would have been into that, but whatever.
Yeah, there's not a lot to Dex. He's just an angry ex-boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a stupid chase scene. The girl's ship gets captured. The girl's ship is called the Marauder. And there is a stupid fight scene which culminates in Dex and Androma meeting again after all of these years. They have a ridiculous flirt fight scene where both individually demand that their respective sides leave that one to me. It's just so stupid.
Yep.
I'm giving the action a hard time here, but the narrative actually establishes a lot of interesting things between Andy and Dex. There's like a custody battle over the Marauder. Apparently Dex used to own it, and now Andy owns it. Dex was the one who got Andy the cuffs that helped her heal her wrists from her tragic backstory.
They're also flashlights.
Yeah, I was about to say they can be like activated. Like, why would you need to activate a medical implement that always needs to keep your wrists working? But whatever. It's not deep, but I like the complexity. I like the emotional depth to this. Again, in kind of more of a schoolyard way, but it's still effective and charming.
Mm-hmm.
So, turns out all of this was just to capture Andy and compel her to do a mission for this guy, General Cyprian Cortos. So if you recall from the prologue, Cortus is Valen's last name. So this guy is Valen's father, another thing that isn't immediately apparent, but I won't try to hide from you. So Andy came from a high-class military family where she used to be the Spectre read bodyguard of General Cortus's daughter, Kali. But when a spaceship joyride ends in Kali's accidental death, Andy was convicted of murder and barely managed to escape. And upon escaping, that's pretty much where she met Dex. And that's kind of just all you really need to know about Andy's dramatic backstory. The mission General Cortus forces Andy to do is actually pretty straightforward. Rescue Valen from Lunamere, the Zenterran prison moon.
Mm-hmm.
If she succeeds, he'll pardon all of her bloody Baroness crimes and her accidental murder crimes and let her return to her home planet, Arcadius. Not that she really has a choice either way, because, I mean, she'll just die, but...
It works well enough.
Yeah, it's like...
And coming from, like, this guy who's, like, kind of her adopted dad, it makes sense that she would want to do it, even if there weren't the threat of death hanging over her head.
Yeah, the past that they have together is also interesting between Andy and General Cordes as well. That's a good point. To ensure that she complies, General Cordes is going to make them take both Dex and the General's protocol droid named Alfie. Now, I will not derail my summary to talk about this too much, but just know that with this robot named Alfie, there will be a scene here and there where the robot romances the spaceship's computer. I just don't care. I'm sorry. I just don't care, but you need to know that this happens in this book.
I have more to say about Alfie during our criticisms, but...
Oh, I have so much to say about Alfie, actually.
Okay, great. We can talk about Alfie later, but yeah, he's like a humanoid, male-coded AI.
He's like C-3PO.
Basically.
So, we have our stakes. We have a ragtag group, each with their own unique abilities, some side characters, a cool location to break into and out of. I'm thinking this has to be like a first Mistborn in space kind of heist book, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would think.
Where we see everyone use their unique abilities. You would think.
You would think the heist would be the main thing.
You would think the heist would be the main thing. And then, as if in answer to the question in grim foreshadowing, our next scene is the crew sitting around shackled in another room, just idly hoping that Andy's okay. Again, the tone issues are kind of weird here because Lyra states unambiguously that she doesn't believe in killing, but like, you're a space pirate murderer mercenary. What do you mean you don't believe in killing? And then Gilly says the word ass and Breck like chastises her for saying the word ass. But like, you're a space pirate. You kill people. What's going on? I don't understand.
If it were canonical that it's like a sleepover, like a group fantasy thing that they're doing, like it would make a lot of sense that Lyra's character, after it's already too late, after the terms have been established, would be like, wait a second, I actually am not on board with the killing though.
Or like, I imagine they're all like canonically around Gilly's age, and one of them says ass like a little bit too loud, and then Breck's player is like, shh, you're gonna wake up my mom, she's gonna hear you cussing.
You can't say that.
Right? We then meet our 1 billionth POV character in this book, Nor, who is the current queen of Zentera. She just sulks about how much Zentera sucks. There's acid rain and it's been stripped of its resources. It's just really fallen on hard times. She's called on by her advisor, Darai, who promises this quote-unquote weapon that's in the final stages of development. And at this point, I'm still on board. I'm thinking, this might be like the Death Star or something, right? Like, even if it was literally just a Death Star ripoff, that would still be pretty cool. I like lasers. I like world-ending weapons. Could be fun. Fool that I am, Jay.
I think it's so funny that both of us were like, I hope it's a laser.
I know, we were like texting back and forth about this.
I also was hoping it would just be a big laser because like everything else is very cozy and familiar. And like a big laser that is aimed at the main character's home planet that she wants to save would be a tangible threat. And it's like, yeah, sure.
Tangible, fun, exciting. She could use some of her heist skills to disable it from the inside. God, you could write this book yourself.
Yeah, if they do a heist in the first half, then maybe another harder heist in the second half with slightly different stakes, but after the character's abilities have been established.
Oh, a boy can dream. The crew is really cynical about this whole mission working out once they meet back up with Andy, but again, they don't really have a choice in the matter. Apparently, Dex and Andy met a bit after Andy's escape from her death sentence, but before she became the Bloody Baroness. So there was like this year or two long period where they were like going around being bounty hunters or whatever, in which they had a fling. And this ultimately ended in what I can only imagine was the end of Star Wars Episode 3, where Andy literally stabs him in the heart on a quote-unquote fiery moon. That has to be Mustafar, right? I don't know. But either way, there's a lot of emotional baggage and contradictions here in a positive way that makes you think.
There's a lot of talk about, like, each character giving their side of what happened and like working it out, you know, in like a one-on-one conversation, but I don't know, that never materializes, so we will never find out what actually occurred.
Never. So the first step of the heist is to figure out how to get in. So Dex somehow has this contact named Soyuna Rumbard, who hangs out at the Dark Matter pub with her friend Glub Shido. No, I'm just kidding. It's just a bar like Mos Eisley, and there's Soyuna. She is a capital R revivalist, someone who can bring you back to life no matter what? ?
As long as it's within 3 minutes.
Right, because, like, starlings can only live for 25 years. Any fool knows that 3 minutes is the most important interval of time when you are dying.
Well, that's when the soul crosses out of the atmosphere and is in the domain of heaven.
Right, out of the, what, I used to know what that was called. Out of hypostasis. I actually don't know.
Flies through one of the holes in the firmament that us fools down here mistake for stars.
Right.
And enters the realm of the gods.
Right. As we all know. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like exploring the implications of this because the book doesn't feel like exploring the implications of this. When asked, Soyuna just says she does it with science.
With science.
And... with science. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
That's an Ernest Klein-ass answer, I have to say.
She has like a bumper sticker with like a fish with legs and it says Darwin on it.
Oh, you know it does. There's definitely another bumper sticker with like a diagram of an atom somewhere on it.
Right. But anyways, she works on Lunamere as this torturer. She's like this sexy dominatrix with tattoos that move around on her skin. And we get a couple pages of backstory about her that you don't have to worry about because she never comes back. So she says, Dex, if you want the map, I'm gonna need my full payment up front. And it's not just money I want. Wink, wink. Jay, you know that I'm not an MRA, but... it is no less gross and coercive when it's a girl doing this to a guy than vice versa. These are both not good situations.
Yeah, I mean, like, non-consensual sex work is non-consensual regardless of the gendered configuration of the arrangement. It's non-consensual sex for pay.
Right. So they just duck into the bathroom and get a map of the prison.
But they actually don't, though, right? Because when she comes out later, she says to Androma, like, we didn't actually do it, you know? Like, he just complained about you for 10 minutes or whatever.
Okay, yeah, I guess. So, I'm sure you can appreciate that intent matters here, Jay. Devil's
Absolutely.
Advocate.
I just wanted to clarify, in case there's any Zenith fans listening who are like, well, actually, it didn't happen. Yes, okay, it didn't happen. We know. But the intent was there.
They didn't cross the Rubicon here, but they will later, so don't worry, buddy. It's gonna get worse in terms of consent.
Yeah.
So the plan of the heist is as follows. Dex and Andy will get arrested, Soyuna will make sure their doors are unlocked for 30 minutes and the guards are less alert. They'll break Valen out, Soyuna will sneak them out in one of the death ships. That's it. Simple, but there's a lot of room for twists and improvisations and ways for the plan to divert from literally what I just said. Right?
Lunamere is like space Alcatraz. It's supposed to be the most secure prison, inescapable, and it's its own moon, right? So like the characters are trapped there and they have 30 minutes to get out. But that's not a lot of time and they don't know fully what the inside looks like. So much could go wrong. This could sustain the whole book.
Right. So they start a fake bar fight and they get arrested and then the heist happens. Exactly as I said it. Exactly as they planned it, Dex and Andy break out of their cells, get Valen, Soyuna shoots them, and then they get shot out in a transport ship. While this is happening, the crew, Lyra, Breck, and Gilly, sit in the ship with the AI and wait for them like kids in a Walmart parking lot minivan. They do not do anything. They're not even like on computers jamming the communications. They're not They're not prank calling the warden. They're not doing anything. They're just waiting.
Nothing.
So
they are waiting stage left.
It is 100% exactly to the letter of the plan. This takes a couple of chapters to describe. There are some Nor and Claren chapters interspersed to pad out the length. None of it remotely matters. Claren has, mind control powers, and at one point came into contact with General Cortus. It's also revealed that Nor's secret weapon is not a Death Star, much to my chagrin, but in fact, a material called Zenith, which is mind control goo. Really, it is just mind control goo.
Yep.
It is distinct from the mind control powers.
Yes. As far as I understand.
Right. I don't know how distinct. Maybe this is a sublimation of the psychic power, but it's definitely distinct. So
it is a different thing from Claren's mind control powers, which require her to focus on a specific individual and direct their will.
Right.
This is just goo you drop in somebody's eye, and contact with the eye makes them
mind controlled.
I don't know, suddenly your puppet or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So one may have powers or one may have goo, and nary the twain shall meet.
The two genders.
The
psychic powers and goo.
Right. Now that's cisnormative. So the crew just picks up our heroes, and they're all safe together. No problem. Valen is in critical condition, though, which is understandable after 2 years of torture. Alfie, the robot, notices that he has this pathogen in his blood. It is literally just mentioned once and then dropped. I was like, okay, so this is probably the Zenith goo. The pathogen is probably, related to the flashback we just had.
That was my thought as well.
Right?
Mm-hmm. That is what it is, right?
Yeah. So, with their friend rescued, Dex and Andy decide that now is the time to have a come-to-Jesus moment about their relationship. I actually do, again, like the back and forth here. Again, they had a fling while they were both bounty hunters, but eventually Dex learned the truth about Andy's being a wanted fugitive and turned her in to become whatever a guardian is. And also because the Arcadians had his dad held prisoner. So motivations are there. The melodrama is there. It's firing on the right cylinders here. It's not, It didn't not work for me. So good job there.
There's plausible deniability where you could explain how this book makes sense if pressed.
Right.
Unlike, Nova's Playlist or something. This book, you could make a case for the fact that it's cohesive.
Right. I don't think an insane person wrote this book. In an extremely disturbing Claren scene, and legitimately content warning for lapses of consent, Claren uses her mind control powers to seduce General Cortus, who has been holding her captive as a political prisoner. She says that she would, quote, willingly give up her body for the cause, unquote. Jesus Christ, I wrote in my book.
I don't want to talk about this during the critique section because I have something really short that I can just say now. The power dynamics of this situation where she is his prisoner, but she is also able to mind control him into sex, are so complicated and so fraught that I don't know how a book that's aspiring for this kind of YA fun and gamesiness can possibly justify it. And I don't want to try to dissect who is more the victim here.
No.
This just can't be here in this genre. This is so crazy. This book is not prepared to talk about this.
Right, yeah, let's just litigate this all right here. Why could she not have just seduced him and then the mind control goo come later?
Right.
Especially since they're distinct concepts. Again, yeah, you can't really compare who's more of the victim, but if she seduced him, it's a lot easier to root for her as an anti-hero versus she mind controlled him. And again, willingly give up her body for the cause, I find extremely gross because, and again, not an MRA, but what about his body that you are using?
Yeah, this situation is just so absolutely horrific because she is literally like a physical prisoner on like a foreign planet, and then she is also completely removing his agency, like immediately.
Yeah.
So it's so fucked up in every single way, and it could take an entire book or two, perhaps, a duology of sorts, to sort that out on its own. And I think that that's a thing that a book could do.
Sure.
But this book doesn't. So I think it needs to go.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's gross. But you need to know that happens. Just as a reminder, Clarence scenes are all in the past, and then we have an adjacent in the present Nor scene where she is mass producing mind control goo. Again, they're distinct. I don't really care, especially because the powers are so gross. Well, it's all very gross, but like the way that the powers are used in the book are very, very gross.
And I think it's supposed to be sexy, like the...
Is it?
I think so. I don't know. Like this book, it has steamy on the back cover, at least in my blurb. So it's like, I don't know. Like, are we supposed to like feel some kind of way about this? Like, I don't know. Like, is the different types of power dynamics at play supposed to be something we enjoy?
I don't know. I'm kink shaming. I don't care. Like, your non-con has to be con. Like that. There is no way around it. I don't even care if it's in fiction. I am saying that empirically as the SBU. That is my opinion. I don't care about yucking your yum or whatever. God.
Yeah, non-con needs to be con.
Yeah, you're right. Con, non-con.
Right.
Anyways, back on the Marauder. Through a plot contrivance, the engines go into meltdown, forcing them to crash land on Adira, which is Lyra's home planet. I didn't mention this earlier, but she's from this planet. Doesn't matter. It's like a nature planet. Ironically, it's more Arcadian than Arcadius is.
It is. It doesn't have weapons even.
Yeah, and speaking of not have weapons, I kind of envision them as being like the Keebler elves from Noah, Man of Destiny, where they're just like completely generic, peaceful agrarian race who just rides around on these weird creatures. There's like this cartoon like crash landing montage where they're just like an inch away from tipping over the first house of this village, and then all the guards come out to get them, and the next thing we know, they're being carted away to explain what happened to Queen Alara.
You can fully imagine that as the ship is crashing, it like the nose of it just is like ding against like the chimney on the edge of town, like whatever house is on the furthest edge.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, no, you were saying they were getting carted away to see Queen Alara, or whatever her name is.
Who is the queen of Adira, and thus ends...
Oh shit, this is where I take over.
Yeah, that's where you take over. I'm not touching the rest of this damn book. You have fun, buddy.
Oh god, oh no.
I think you'd be the funniest person to say this. So you're going to be Soyina.
Of course you made me Soyina.
I didn't even think about that.
I'm also a revivalist.
Soyina said, drawing Dex's attention back again.
With every death comes the chance for a second life. The opportunity for more information. I bring them back. So long as I'm within the 3-minute window, of course.
Of course. Any idiot knows. 3 minutes is very important to the death of a person.
As long as I'm within the 3-minute window again.
With what? Andy asked. How can you bring a dead man back to life? Soyina chuckled arrogantly, clearly relishing Andy's ignorance.
With science, dear girl.
I fucking love science!
I love science. God, I love the just appeal to science as a concept, as if that's somehow an answer to anything.
Yeah, and I kind of just assumed that it was like a borderline magic power that she had, not like a scientific principle that within 3 minutes you can revive anyone, no matter what, even including shooting them with a gun.
Yeah, like, I guess you could just sort of sew them back together and inject them with whatever this serum is, even if they had been totally dismembered, and they would just come back because of science.
Picking up from there, we cut back to Noor, who is leaving the tower in which she has heretofore resided to go and visit the ruins of her family's former palace, which were destroyed during sort of like the final assault
of the Cataclysm.
The Cataclysm, which was basically a final assault on Zentera when they did succeed in splitting away, but it was like a Pyrrhic victory, right? Like they win sort of like, and they get to secede, but they are totally destroyed. She's riding in this carriage with her lover, whose name is Tsan, and her uncle. I'm not going to say it any other way. It's Tsan. Thank you.
Tsan pasta.
Tsan pasta. It's the German word for tooth. I don't know why, but it is.
It is.
It has nothing to do with anything about him, but he's like her bodyguard and her boyfriend. Anyway, so he's in the carriage, and then the other person in the carriage is her uncle, who's like her advisor, and she's really comically mean to him the whole ride. But it turns out that he doesn't actually mind, because she's being mean as part of this like decades-long mind game they're playing with each other, where her being mean is to him an indication of her ability to rule effectively.
Sure.
It's okay that she's just like nasty to him. Whatever. She gets to like the last remaining wall or whatever, where there's a balcony on the edge of the palace, and she gives a speech to the capital citizens where she reveals that this golden hand she's had the whole time, it's like a prosthetic, which the reader knew, but apparently her citizenry did not. So she reveals that this prosthetic is in fact a prosthetic and not just an actual gold hand that she has. I don't know why they would have thought that it was, but apparently they did.
Okay.
So like she makes a big deal of the fact that she has this disability, essentially, as she looks down over the citizenry and makes note of all of the other people who were disabled by the war that they sort of won, sort of lost. And the narrative frames this as her sort of lowering herself to the level of like the peasantry, which I really don't like that association of like disability with the lowering of the self to a lower like social class. It's very gross.
Yeah.
But on top of that, she's actually lying and manipulating them to be on her side because she wants there to be morale in the citizenry for this upcoming war that she's planning on waging.
To make them more primed for the goo? Like, why can't you just goo them right off? Like, I don't understand why they have to build morale.
I don't know, man. I don't know. But it's another thing where it's like the whole situation is like all kinds of messed up, and this book could center itself completely around examining that particular power dynamic, but it doesn't. It's like a throwaway scene. Back with our main crew, they've arrived on Adira. They reunite with Lyra's brother, Lon, and they go back to see her aunt. Again, that's Queen Alara. Valen then wakes up in an Adiran hospital bed and has a brief conversation with Queen Alara. I don't know why this happens. I think this is the only time these characters ever interact.
Pretty much.
They don't have any connection to each other. Because Alara is queen of one of the planets that's allied to Valen's dad's planet, this would be kind of like if you were in a coma for 10 years and then like your dad's cubicle mate showed up at your hospital bed a little bit. Like it's basically his coworker.
Yeah. So it's like Valen's an artist, like Valen paints. And Alara has a bunch of scales on her that look like paint. And that's the only associative, like, thought in my head that they established.
Yeah, I don't know what the significance of it being these two characters is. Because then, at the end of the scene, Androma walks in, and then the scene ends as Valen, like, passes back out from exhaustion. Not long after this, Alara promises Lyra her own ship and crew if she'll come home and be a part of her aunt's fleet, I guess. It's weird that they have a fleet because, again, they don't have weapons, so I'm not sure what purpose this fleet...
They don't have foot soldiers, but they have top-of-the-line spaceships.
Right, they have the best, fastest spaceships in the galaxy, but they don't use them for war, apparently, because they don't have weapons. So maybe they're just like pod racing up there.
But they ride around on woolly mammoths.
I don't know what they're doing up there, but it's real fast, whatever it is. It's a really good deal, apparently, to Lyra. She's very tempted by it. And in part because she would get to spend more time with her brother, but she would have to leave all of her girlfriends behind, basically, as part of the arrangement. So this leaves her with something to ponder, and she leaves the audience chamber. Back with Androma, she and the rest of the crew play in a lake for what is, by page count in my copy, one of the book's longest chapters. It's just 10 pages, but it is one of the longer ones.
Yep.
And all they do is play in a lake. It's like a fun and games montage, but as like an entire described chapter. Sort of a beach episode.
At like the 60% mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of the beach episode.
Then Androma and Dex are called to meet with the newly awakened Valen, who like kind of rambles at them about his time in prison before suddenly like standing up and leaving the room. So he's like been talking about like, I was tortured, I didn't have a name anymore, I just became a number. And then they are trying to get any sort of useful information out of him about how he was kidnapped or like what information was pulled out of him during his years of torture. And then he just like stands up and leaves. And they just let him. So that happens. Well, that just happened.
Right. I bet they said that too.
They probably did. Androma then follows Valen out into the woods where they catch up and they reminisce about Kaylee. They sort of have Kaylee's absence in common. Basically, like, they both knew her very well as she was growing up, and then she suddenly died, and that left a huge hole in both of their lives, and they bond over that fact.
And Valen still does kind of like resent Andy for that, for quote unquote killing her.
Right. Valen still blames her at this stage. So like their friendship is hampered by his blame of her.
Right.
But they still sort of like start to get a little bit closer. Just because they have her in common. With that awkward conversation out of the way, the group then gets ready for this peace festival that commemorates, I think, the end of the war that saw Zentera break away from the unified systems?
Yes.
Okay, so
there's... What is it called? Rivalia?
Yeah, it has a name. There's like this getting ready montage where all the girls are like, oh my god, my hair, my makeup, my dress, whatever. I would have honestly, like with Lightlark, I would have liked for that to be more substantive, I think. Like, if the stuff that they were putting on was more symbolic of their character arcs, but not in like a super obvious way. Like, I don't want Gilly to wear a dress made of like guns, and I don't want Breck to wear a dress made of like biceps. Like, I want it to be a little bit more interesting than that, but like, if you're gonna do this, like, I want you to do it.
I have a lot to say about this scene, don't worry.
But yeah, no, I like this montage. I just wish it was more. Then they go to the festival, and Dex gets really horny and jealous because Valen and Androma dance. But then, suddenly, Zentera invades, slaughtering innocent after innocent as they search for Valen. Oh no, we have to save him. Right. So anyway, then there's this fight that all of them are in, and then Lon is wounded, and Dex comes up with this plan to take out a couple of soldiers, steal their uniforms, and sneak on board to the closest ship with Valen so that they can commandeer the ship and fly it back to Arcadius, which, as we saw with the Heist, is basically exactly what they do, beat for beat, with virtually no problem. There is a fight on the ship with like an alien who's the same race as Breck, so basically big and bulletproof, but this one's also fully grown, this person. So Breck isn't able to fight them. Breck is taken out, Androma is taken out, but then Alfie shows up. That's the AI, since we haven't mentioned him, and in terms of runtime, what's probably over 45 minutes at this point. Alfie the AI shows up and vaporizes this big alien with a vaporizer ray that he was apparently equipped with the whole time. So he does that, and that just happened, and then they leave. That's it.
Jay,
ongoing massacre occurring.
Why haven't you mentioned Gilly's marketable plushie pet?
I did leave that out of my summary completely. I wasn't going to mention it at all, because I don't care.
I figured. But Gilly gets a magical plushie pet that she names...
Havoc.
Havoc.
Yeah.
Havoc. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little guy.
It's just...
I just kind of imagine it as like a Puffle from Club Penguin.
Yeah, basically exactly that. I think it has horns, but otherwise it's like a fluffy, silly creature that does visual gags whenever.
Available now for $19.99 from our Etsy shop.
Except I don't think it ever was, but the dream was there. Next up, the crew figures out what to do. Androma and Lyra have this argument about whose fault it was that Lon is in critical condition. Androma takes responsibility as captain. She's like, this mission was something that I ordered us all to do. I ordered us to come to Adira. So indirectly or directly, it's my fault that Lon is now about to die. And this is one of the few moments where she takes responsibility for something in a way that doesn't really feel self-pitying. Like, I felt like in this instance, she was like, you know what, Lyra, as your friend, I am owning up to you. Like, at this moment, I'm not able to do anything about it materially, but I am confessing to you. This is my fault, and I will accept that, and we'll work it out later.
Which is something.
And I liked that. I thought that was very nice, and it's a trait I think could have been more prevalent in her character.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, so with Valen safely aboard this commandeered ship, the crew just kind of leaves. Adira is undergoing attack actively. This planet that famously has no weapons is under assault. Yeah, and they're just like, whatever, we're going to leave. So they deliver Valen to his dad. They spend like 3 chapters arriving, where like the chapter will end with like, and then the ship pulled in. And then they got off the ship onto the landing bay. And then they walked into the palace.
Oh my
and it's
God.
like, all right, I get it. They've arrived.
Yeah.
They meet General Cortos, and he denies Dex and Androma payment up front. He's like, nope, I'm not going to pay you. Actually, you're going to do more work for me.
Until the next festival.
Yeah, for another...
Our festival.
Right, until basically I'm satisfied, which at this time involves them protecting Valen during this upcoming welcome home ceremony.
Now that's a Darth Vader thing.
That is a Darth Vader
I've
thing.
altered the terms of the deal, or whatever he says in the second episode.
That is true. Meanwhile, Lyra has a nightmare, and then she's woken up by Queen Alara, who is alive and on Arcadius for some reason. We know that she's good, which is nice, and she has also been designated person who wakes people up from bad dreams and comforts them character. So it's nice that she has a firm role, I guess.
Yeah, and came all the way out for this stupid party.
I guess so. Her planet is actively being destroyed by enemy forces, but she's here on Arcadius waking people up from bad dreams. That's monarchy for you, I guess. Andrew, I wouldn't normally do this, but I am going to need your help for this next part.
Okay.
Because this next scene is the one where Androma and her dad, who is General Cortos' Spectre Reed bodyguard, reunite.
Right.
Her dad becoming his Spectre is like a big controversy between her and her dad.
Right.
For reasons that I didn't totally follow.
Well, I think it makes sense. It's
okay. Can you fill this in for me?
Well, I think it's intentionally ambiguous whether Andy's dad being General Cortus's new Spectre is like a punishment or a sign that Andy's dad like values his political career over his daughter. That is intentionally lampshadedly ambiguous in the text.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the wrinkle that I was mostly struggling with was her dad helped her escape from her holding cell when she had been convicted of murder and sentenced to death.
Yes.
But then when she became a space pirate, it seemed like he was really mad that she was then destroying the family reputation.
Right.
So like he wanted her to be a criminal on the run from the law, but he didn't want her to be a criminal on the run from the law.
It's either intentional and or compelling, because that does sound like a realistic contradiction in someone's character. I mean, so let's picture him as like a smarmy kind of Braden Stranger-esque, like political Machiavellian type. He would not want his daughter to be publicly executed, but he would also not want his daughter to be the Bloody Baroness.
Sure.
So I do think it makes sense that he's in this weird limbo state in terms of his relationship with her. I 100% believe that he would slip her a key so she could escape right before her death sentence. And again, we don't know whether him being a Spectre is a punishment thing, but him continuing his career trajectory as it is, it's just, that's his goal. And he doesn't want the Bloody Baroness to stain that.
Interesting. I think some of that could be, if that is the case, be lampshaded a little bit better. Specifically, like this contradiction in his desire to advance politically, right? Because if that's the case, it makes total sense that he would want his daughter to escape, but it also makes total sense that he wouldn't want his daughter to escape and have a name.
Right, so it's kind of like this weird balancing act.
Yeah, and I think that if he is like a careerist politician type, I would think that's awesome. I think that would make a lot of sense given other things that are about to happen in the novel. I think that could just be acknowledged a little bit more directly. But anyway, you have filled in the questions that I had summary-wise. So that leaves space for us to then cut back to Noor, who then wanders around the ruins of her palace. She's crying, she gets comforted by Tsan, and she's afraid that her plan to mind control the entire world is going to fail, and the narrative frames this as a moment where we're supposed to feel bad for her because she fears failure, and we can relate to that, I guess. Yeah. But it's you're kind of asking me to relate to Space Hitler right now, so I kind of don't. I'm confused by your desire for me to do that,
right? But
here we are. The next day, I guess, Androma and Valen bond more over... You didn't call her Kaylee, you called her Kali, right?
They abbreviated it to something that made me think it wasn't Kaylee. But I don't care. If you want to call her Kaylee, that's fine. I think they called her Call at one point, or they... whatever, I don't give a shit.
So Androma and Valen bond more over her death. Mm-hmm. And for a minute, it seems like it's going to get romantic between them. But then he friend zones her and comes out as gay?
What?
Question mark? I mean, he's I'm not interested in a way that makes it seem like maybe more is going on.
You mean the quiet artist painter was gay?
Yeah, so the quiet artist, sort of flamboyant, sometimes feminine painter comes out as maybe queer.
I completely missed that part, but can I tell you what I wrote on my page? I wrote, please stay platonic, please stay platonic, please stay platonic, over and over and over, because I just did not want a love triangle, especially not at this stage of the narrative. So I guess if they gave him a case of the gays, then that means there's no love triangle. I completely missed that. Wow.
It's mega subtextual, but I felt like it was maybe there. Happy to hash that out in the comments or in Discord for anybody that felt differently about it. Queerness aside, they decide to stay platonic, granting Andrew's one wish.
Yes, my literal one wish.
And fulfilling the prophecy.
Well, except for a Death Star. That was never fulfilled.
Right. Well, you get one, and this was your one.
Yeah.
The next thing that happens is Alfie just kind of shows up destroyed.
Yeah.
In pieces. He's being carted away in chunks by some kind of janitor in the palace on Arcadius. And Androma is did anybody else see that? And she steals his memory chip from the pile of debris. Will that be relevant for the rest of the book?
No.
So forget about it.
Okay, good. I was worried because I didn't think it was.
Then Androma gets a case of the sentimentals and decides to go to Kaylee's room where she's reminiscing about their past. She finds a stack of orbs, one of which has a magical feather inside.
Shut up.
Just kidding, that doesn't happen.
That didn't happen.
That's Lightlark.
That's good. This is really just Lightlark in space, isn't it?
This is just Lightlark in space. No, she doesn't find any kind of magical feather, although I do hope that comes back in Sky Zone, since it didn't come back in Nightbane. Because I really want to know what was in that feather.
Something worse than a magical orb happens.
In Skylanders?
Dex and Andy make out in Kaylee's room.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, they do make out. Right after she doesn't find the orb with the feather in it. I know, I'm making this confusing. Andy goes to Kaylee's room and gets sentimental, and then Dex follows her there, and then they both have a sort of intimate conversation and start getting frisky and making out. But then before they can go all the way, thank God,
thank Christ,
they mutually agree that they can never be together again, intimately, in a physical sense or intimately in an emotional sense. They're like, we are coworkers now, which, yes, agree, you are.
Yeah.
Then Androma catches up with her mom, and she has yet another confusing parental argument where she ultimately ends up threatening to kill her mom for being too in favor of like the party line of the Arcadian royal family. But she doesn't kill her mom. She leaves before she can get that mad.
You likened this scene to Nova's playlist specifically because of the emotional dysregulation on display here.
In our text conversations, I did liken this to Noah's playlist because there's a moment, there's like this weird tipping point where Androma is like, you're lying, I'm gonna kill you. And it's like, whoa, okay.
Like, where did this come from?
Where is this coming from? Why is this happening now? This intensity feels like it did not escalate to this. It feels like it just occurred.
Her mom comes off as very like foppish and image focused. I 100% understand Andy despising her, but I don't buy into the, oh, I'm gonna literally kill you, mom. Like, she goes crazy.
She like draws weapons on her.
Yeah.
It's very strange. But thankfully, she doesn't kill her mom, and she leaves.
Thankfully.
Not long after this, she and Valen go to the welcome home ceremony, where there's this weird scene where some guy bullies them, and they totally own him in the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah.
And he is embarrassed, and then they walk away epically, and then sunglasses are on them, and it's like...
Yeah, he was like so scared to see the bloody Baroness or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know what happens there, but something happens.
It's like, when I go to prom with a bad boy, then everyone's going to be scared. Like,
I don't know what's good. It's another moment where it does feel like this is children, like, sort of dreaming this up. Dex sees all of this happen. In particular, the fact that Androma and Valen are together, and he gets horny and jealous again, and just sort of seethes in the corner.
Yeah.
Finally, at the climax of the ball, Valen is to give a speech with his dad, General Cortas, but just as the speech is reaching its dramatic climax, Valen turns and stabs his dad right in the chest on stage for everyone to see. This is exactly as unexpected and random as it probably feels to you, listener, right now. Having read 500 pages of this does not prepare you for this moment at all.
I thought I had misread.
Me too. Then Zenterans invade. They invade the capital city of the sort of like alliance that is posed against them. The fact that they're able to just do this raises a lot of questions for me about like the security measures in place. On like a planetary
Very
scale,
much like Lightlark.
Like Lightlark. If this is what the enemy is capable of, why are there not sort of checks and balances already in place? Whatever. Turns out Valen has actually been Noor's ally the whole time, and he has made this possible in some way.
Because the torture activated his blood powers.
You're getting ahead of me. Hold on. Yes.
Sorry.
He's been her ally the whole time.
Spoiler alert.
He and Androma have this big fight, but he wins somehow, and then Dax drags Androma's body and General Cortas's body away through a secret exit that was foreshadowed earlier.
Yes.
And by foreshadowed, what I mean is that Androma and Dex were walking alone through a hallway, and then Androma was like, hey, Dex, here's a list of places that General Cortas has his secret passages.
Yep.
Let me name them for you verbally with my mouth apropos of nothing, and then she did. And Dex was like, oh, that's interesting. Valen then mind controls everyone in the room, not using the goo. Notably, this is just something he can do now. And I think, Andrew, this is where you wanted to cut in and talk about the blood virus.
Right, because not only does he have the blood virus, which had to be induced through torture. Again, this is not the Zenith goo. This is an innate psychic power that he has that could only be manifested through trauma, pain,
right,
whatever. Also, what's interesting to note is that they have one last version of his refrain, my name is Valen Cortas, vengeance will be mine. But before he stabs his dad, he says, my name is Valen Solus, vengeance shall be mine. Solus is the surname of Noor, the queen of Zentera. which will be very relevant in short order.
Yeah, in like 10 seconds.
In 10 seconds.
So as I've said, he mind controls everyone in the room using the powers that he developed by being tortured by his sister, Nor Solus. Hidden away, Androma and Dex and a dying General Cortas all huddle together. General Cortas tells Dex Valen's secret backstory. In short, it turns out that Valen is the child of General Cortas, yes, but not General Cortas's actual wife.
Right.
Instead, his mom is Nor's mom,
Claren,
who was Cortas's prisoner.
Right.
But also increasingly like this weird kind of dom, mind control dom, sexually.
Yeah,
It's
literally.
weird. It's ambiguous. Is it ambiguous? Is it literal?
No,
I don't know.
No, it's literal. It is literal.
Okay.
She literally mind controls him.
She mind controls him, but he likes it. After years of her being his prisoner / dom, she eventually succeeds in breaking into his mind, basically to such an extent that she can hypnotize him to set her free, which she does.
Right.
But he, in the meantime, has also been getting accustomed to what it feels like to be mind controlled by her specifically. So he's been kind of like microdosing mind control.
Sure.
Which means that he is only half mind controlled. So he does let her go, not of his own free will. But then his defenses kick in and he's able to explode her ship, which I think is what causes the palace to blow up, because her ship like crashes into the palace, or it's like as it's raining down in the form of like shrapnel out of the atmosphere, it destroys the palace, something like that.
Sure.
In the meantime, he also manages to keep Valen and raise him as his own son, knowing nothing of his mother. We now know that he and Nor are half-siblings. Anyway, back on Valen and Nor in the present, they instantly conquer the whole planet by making it rain goo. Apparently they have found a way to turn this goo into clouds, which then rain goo.
Yep.
And it rains goo on everyone. I guess everyone's just outside.
Right.
And they all get mind controlled at once like that. It just happens. Meanwhile, on his deathbed, General Cortas tells Dex that he is making Androma his heir, which means that she will be heir to the, throne of the Allied or unified systems.
Specifically the army or the fleet or whatever. Like, she's the military heir.
Right.
Which is an interesting way for military titles to be transferred, but I digress.
Do they have other leadership? Is there like an emperor above Cortas?
Not a named one.
Okay. I assumed that this was like her getting the crown, basically.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know. As I read it, it seemed like Cortas was like the de facto leader of the unified systems, like, period.
Something like that.
She's at least the leader of the military of the unified systems, although she is still in a coma.
And they're all still mind controlled.
And everybody is mind controlled, except for them, because they were in a bunker or whatever.
Right.
And they all lived happily ever after. Or do they?
We can't keep doing that in every single book. But yeah, no, that is the end of the book.
That is where it ends.
Valen's mind control powers dovetail nicely into the mind control goo. So they're all just kind of augmentations of each other.
Yeah, basically everybody is mind controlled at this point, with the exception of Dex, Androma, and the dead body of General Cortas, and I guess Valen and Nor, since they're both in control of the other mind-controlled people. But everybody else is mind-controlled, including the crew.
And that's all she wrote. Until book 2.
Until book 2, which you have read, I guess?
No, I haven't. It's on my shelf, right next to my signed copy of Zenith and my light-boxed arc of Zenith. That was like $15. I've never seen an arc that cheap. Like, even, like, your more obscure arcs go for a lot more.
Yeah, I had never heard of this book until, like, a month ago.
I had never heard of these YouTubers, like, ever. So it's all kind of new to me. Oh. Cold dread slithered its way up and down Andy's spine. Dead or alive. Andy hoped for the latter. Soina glanced between the two of them, laughter tugging at her lips.
Death is a simple thing. It's pirates I'll never understand.
It's just... Is that like as funny as I think it is? Because I'm just like... These two completely alien concepts to each other. You know what I don't understand? Internet piracy. How would you like it if Cannibal Corpse stole your favorite dress?
It does feel like these objects are incomparable, these concepts. It is kind of like saying, I understand the inner workings of the PlayStation 5, but don't ask me about botany. Like, I wasn't gonna.
Well, Jay, since you enjoyed giving your summary so much, now that you're on a roll, do you want to maybe start us off on some things that Zenith Princesses of Earth Volume 1 by Lindsay Cummings and Sasha Alsberg did well?
I'll start us off small. There's one particular simile that I found particularly evocative, and it's describing Alfie. It goes, the AI's face was white, like the snow-capped mountains on Solera. I like that in character, it's comparing something in world to something else in world, which made me feel more immersed. And I also like the impersonality, the coldness of snow-capped mountain for a description of an AI's facial expression in particular, especially an AI that throughout the novel misunderstands social cues and has lots of little jokes about not getting this or that nuance in conversation. I felt like that was a moment where the imagery was good. It was firing on all cylinders, both in terms of the character it was describing and the character from whose point of view it was being described. And for all those reasons, it was just a good simile.
Yeah, I actually want to use a lot of that for my first thing for y'all. And this is something that people have given you two shit for, but I actually really like. There are a lot of similes to in-universe concepts and in-universe things, and they're often not very intuitive. You know, they say the ship flew as fast as a deer in Darawak, and it's a little bit of a silly phrase. You know, you don't really know what an Adir in Darawak is, but okay, this is a close third perspective. I'm 100% down with this as flavor text at minimum, or world building at best. I don't need to know everything about your world building to know that Dex being as cold as a Solarian ice wolf is a cold wolf. I get it. It's fine. Right. It works. It adds texture and flavor to the world. I think it's cool.
I agree without qualification. Wholly. We are familiar enough as media consumers with the phrase as fast as a blank. We know that means the thing was very fast. Right. So kind of in an unintuitive way, that simile actually tells us more about the Adiran Darawak, or whatever it was, than it does about the ship.
Right.
It tells us the ship is fast, but we already knew that. It tells us about the world, so it's kind of world building, which I like a lot.
And Darawaks come back as a point of reference, and then I'm okay, yeah, Darawaks are fast, so when someone says, oh, this feels like being on the back of a Darawak, I get it. It works. It's suxposition, as we described in the Noah Princes of Earth Remnants Volume 1. I kind of want to expand from the similes while we're on this concept of made-up words. Or made-up concepts, even. I don't care what anyone on the internet says. I love the inexplicable mutations and weird alien appendages that everyone has. To be fair, I don't think it was intentional in this way, but this is textbook suxposition. The bartender has 6 arms, someone has webbed feet, there's someone with gills, Lyra has her scales. This is just how their life is. Do you constantly think about the phenotypic origin of every person that you see? Don't answer that, actually.
I was
don't answer that. Again, I don't think it was necessarily intentional suxposition, but it works very well in that vein. This is a universe where weird people live. Some people have tentacles. I will say, on the other side of this coin, there's not a lot of clarity as to what.
Yeah.
So Adirans have scales, but are people with 6 arms from another planet? It never really bothered me until towards the very end. I think it was even the second ball, not the one on Adira, but the one on Arcadius, where there was just some random side character with white irises almost certainly the work of body modification.
Yeah.
That one got me because, like, okay, 6 arms, tentacles, that's totally normal, but white irises, you have to have, like, fucked yourself up. Like, what's going on here?
I don't know. This book is, like, weird about altering your body. Like, when it comes to, like, a prosthetic or a body modification, it, like, always calls it out. But when it's, like, I don't know, like an alien trait, then it's like cool. I don't understand exactly like what it's going for with that.
And I get it, honestly. Like, if you're living among alien races, like, you might need certain augmentations for different planets or different lines of work or whatever. But, like,
yeah, maybe.
What's the line? Adherents, I think, are, like, specifically mutated.
Yeah.
They might even be literally human, but the adherent scales are a mutation.
Yeah, and I think some adherents have other mutations too, right?
I think so.
Like, they don't all have scales?
I think so. But are these mutations different from body modifications, different from being born with tentacles? There's a lot of, like, ambiguity there. And I think a good amount of ambiguity actually will be for the best here, because I don't necessarily care because it's not the focal point of the story, but don't listen to these people on the internet who are like, what's a Darawak? This doesn't make any sense. Like, those people are morons. I'm sorry. Like, everyone gets what you're saying here, and I think it's effective.
I'm actually really interested in your reaction to like other people's reviews, because I had, I think, a similar one. I did comb through the Goodreads reviews of this before we recorded, which is not something I normally do. And I noticed that a lot of the low reviews, so like anything that was 2.5 stars and below, I was like, I would probably rate this a similar number, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
Like on Goodreads specifically, because that's where I looked. I disagreed with like a lot of the things that were being said. And number one was like, oh, I don't like that the aliens all have like weird random body part differences. And it's like, I don't know, they're aliens. Like, what do you want?
Yeah. What do you want? It would be worse if they were even more alien. It's better that some of them just have web feet or gills or whatever. That's a lot more like clean.
I'm like, if we're in a world where everybody is like bipedal and basically humanoid, like at least we kind of understand the terms of engagement in like any encounter without the authors having to go out of their way to be like, this one's an octopus,
right.
This one's like quadrupedal, this one's like a werewolf. Like, I don't know, like they're all just basically human with like a little flavor text.
Yeah, I would characterize a lot of the online reaction to this book as uncharitable at the very least. Again, I don't know anything about our creators. Apparently, like, some people got rubbed the wrong way by the personality that they projected. I have nothing to substantiate this. I would not rate this book very highly, but like Jay said, not because there were Darawaks or ice wolves, right? A lot of other things, but not the world building. The world building is fine. I don't give a shit. Right. Mostly.
If the novel explored the themes that it introduces and the world building was just kind of mid, I think I would like it a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it introduces some interesting themes, for sure, but it just doesn't do anything with them. But anyway.
Right, yeah, therein lies the problem. I liked the refrains here and there.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
There were a couple points where it seemed like the narrative was playing with redundancy. I couldn't help but notice in the first half, there was one scene where Lyra was like, had I just flown better or done this or that thing, we wouldn't be in this mess. And then a couple pages later, Andy would be like, had I just been a better captain, or if I didn't make this mistake, we wouldn't be in this mess. Like, it was very, very similar down to the phrasing and sentence composition. These two girls in parallel just being like, oh, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm so racked with guilt about these things. It really shows the connection that the crew has, or it, at the very least, like Andy and Lyra together. Mm-hmm. And along with stuff like, I am Valen Cordis, vengeance will be mine. That theme of refrain, I think, was something that really transformed the book as you read it.
It's interesting. I didn't pick up on that at all. I mean, the Valen Cordis one I did because it's like literally the same phrasing every time the same character says it. But those instances where it's different characters back to back, I didn't pick up on that. But that's super neat. I wish that had been more intentional.
Right.
Because I think that with Lyra and Andy specifically, there's like that inflection point where it seems like their lives might go in opposite directions, right? Because Lyra might become sort of like a legal space captain, and then Andy might become like continue to be, I guess, like a murderous pirate. So that kind of parallel phrasing but opposite life trajectories could be a really interesting tension.
Andy and Lyra's dynamic and Andy and Dex's dynamic are so fleshed out, almost to the point where this is a negative because it makes all the other relationships kind of vestigial. But Lyra and Andy especially had a lot of build up to them when Lyra was presented with this opportunity to change the trajectory of her life. Like, I cared. Like, I genuinely was like, oh, wait, you know, there's stakes here because they do have this deep emotional connection, and that was conveyed to me by these refrains. And again, it fizzled, but it was there, and I think that's worth calling out.
Yeah, no, I was definitely sad too there, where I was like, oh no, their lives might like split apart. That would really suck, especially like because they're still so young, right? Like they're still in their like formative years. For their friendship to end now would be...
Right, and we have this primacy effect with them, where they were the first dynamic that we experienced in the book.
Yeah.
The emotional core is really solid, and it's hard to see because, you know, there's prose issues, there's characterization issues. The redundancies that I mentioned could very easily be construed as a negative, but it is there, and that's what makes this book so interesting to me, and what makes it such a good candidate for the English Club.
Yeah, it has very tangible positives that make you wish that they had been more honed in on and that the rest had been pared away. Because in addition to all the things that Andrew said, there's just a quantity of text that is really like prohibitive to really feeling the things that the book wants us to feel.
Quantity of text.
You like that? I thought that was like fairly ordinary sounding. Like,
I love it.
It's like my copy at least is, in terms of just pages of the book itself, 556 pages.
One of the longer books for English Club podcast, I would think.
Yeah, no, I got a hold of this and I was like, uh-oh. But I read the last 200 pages in like a single sitting. They pretty much flew by because so much happened.
And
so there is that.
The chapters tend to be like 2 pages long, so you net like half a page of blank space like every time the shift happens.
Okay, just when I was starting to feel good about my reading pace, you're like, oh, actually, it doesn't count because half of it was just white space.
No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I just mean. Like the POV started to change really rapidly towards the end of the book.
You're also definitely not wrong because white space aside, I don't know if this is in your copy, but in my copy, there's also like black space at the top of each chapter heading where there's like a little picture of a nebula.
Yes, mine too.
Okay, so yeah, there is like a lot of empty space. And with all of the dialogue that's just like quips, some sections are pretty skimmable.
Mm-hmm. I want to harp on the emotional core for a little bit longer because so much of it feels intentional. And I feel like, especially recently, as we've reviewed more unsavory works, our positives tend to be more tongue-in-cheek, but I want to state whole cloth unambiguously, I believe that the good things that are in this book are good both because of intentionality and of talent. Dex and Andy's like custody fight over the Marauder, the motivations that Dex had for selling her out, the emotional connection that they had, the dynamic between Lyra and Andy, the dramatic irony of Andy not knowing about Lyra's deal with Queen Adira, or whatever her name was, Alara. And this is kind of goes back to the intro. I wrote this book. When I was writing my first spec fic book, I was like, ooh, I'm going to put some dramatic irony in this scene, and I'm going to have this complex confluence of motivations. Genuinely, I feel like so much went into this that if we just shaved it down a little bit, I think there would be a lot to go off of here.
This is technically a criticism, but I'm going to call it a positive because it's something that definitely can't be said of like other books we've read. I feel like this is a book of play.
Yes.
Like this is a book where two authors are having fun with some ideas that genuinely interested them. And unfortunately, I think the confluence of ideas that they individually and collectively chose don't cohere into like what I would call a publishable novel, and yet it was published. Unfortunately, that is the case in my opinion. It is not really a publishable book.
No.
But you can tell that they had fun, and you can tell that they really cared about these characters. Like, these are generic space bounty hunters. We've got like a small one and a big one. We've got the robot one. We've got the badass OC do not steal.
Right.
We've got her Spock. And those are all tropes that we all already know. There is not really much new about them as such, although you can certainly like tweak them in ways that are interesting.
Sure.
But you can tell that the writers really cared about these specific iterations of these tropes.
And that makes it cozy.
That makes it nice in its own sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that similar to Lightlark, since we've already evoked it, like this is the thing where like a publisher probably should have said no, or should have said like this needs to be more complicated, or like this part feels vestigial.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in that way the agents and editors along the way and the publishers along the way like kind of failed these two, but you can tell that their love of the material is on every page.
And it's so close. It's closer than Lightlark to being like...
It is definitely closer than Lightlark.
This is a work of art. This is closer to that stage, I guess. I'm about to lose the entire audience, so I'm going to look back at the analytics and see a huge drop-off at this point. But you saying that made me realize that this is the literary equivalent of something called YouTube poop tennis.
I don't know this.
So two YouTube poopers would start with a clip, and one person would make a YouTube poop off it, and it would be like a simple YouTube poop, like with sus jokes and maybe some flip stuff, and then they would send it to the other person, and then that would get modified further and further, and then they'd send it back. And it would just go on and on and on until it's not, as a YouTube poop, very good. Mm-hmm. It's just noise. But you see these very high caliber editing skills on display.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately like, I don't want to see Bobby Hill strobe across the screen, you know? Like, I want to see something more substantial as a YouTube poop. But it's just an exercise between these two artists to stretch these certain muscles or display these certain skills. And the difference is I had to pay to get Zenith, whereas I just clicked on and clicked off of a YouTube poop, you know?
Yeah. If Zenith had been made in ancient Greece between two lyrical narrativologists, narrators, we'll say. If Zenith had been written in ancient Greece by two narrators, both of whom were playing on the lyre, and they were collaboratively like strumming out and reciting in dactylic hexameter a story about pirates, and it didn't really make a lot of sense, that would have been okay, right? Because it was like a live performance where the artists were like yes-anding each other for like 2 hours, and it would have been awesome to experience, even if like the cohesive thing was not cohesive. But as a book, it's like, okay, I can look back at all of this, and the fact that I almost called him Zayden, Valen, and the fact that Valen is being tortured at the beginning just to unlock his psychic powers so that at the end he can mind control like a ballroom full of people, like it doesn't justify itself.
No.
If it had been like a fun little back and forth game, sure, but like seeing it as a fixed thing, it's like, I don't know about it.
Mind control aside, it is a very cozy little read. You know, you have your crew, and you can believe that they love each other. Actually, let me start there, because the contradictions feel realistic. I love the idea of the Bloody Baroness trying to balance these two aspects of her life, where she genuinely loves her crew in like a very girly, childish way, but also faces the material reality where these unsavory jobs are the only way that she can survive. Mm-hmm. And I know they didn't really deliver on it, but the promise alone is a lot better than some other books that we've had for this podcast. Yeah. And the idea of this balance is again, thought out. Like, I see how someone could have conceived of this, and it's an interesting character to explore.
I was disappointed by this book, which implies that at some point I had expectations.
Yes,
and
I was never disappointed by Lightlark.
Right, like my expectations for this book were very much like what you were saying, Andrew. I was like, oh, there's like this all-girl crew, and they're going to have this fun romp across the galaxy, and they're going to have to be brutal, and they're going to cry together, and it's going to be like this emotional roller coaster. But then the fact that those expectations were not met was what led to me being disappointed. So it's like kind of a...
Backhanded?
No.
Contradictory?
It's kind of paradoxical in that way, right? Because it's like, if I hadn't been expecting anything, I wouldn't be disappointed, but like now I am disappointed, and it's like... my expectations weren't met. That's not paradoxical. That's just how disappointment works. Never mind. Forget about it.
That's almost a good thing in and of itself, is that
it is almost
had
expectations. Okay. Basically what I was trying to say is that like the pitch is good.
The pitch is good.
The pitch is like very compelling.
The pitch is gangbusters.
And you can tell that like the energy is maintained throughout. Even though the pitch is ultimately not delivered on, and I think that's pretty undeniable, the energy is maintained. The love of the game is there.
So
it seems like it was probably a fun write.
Oh God, yeah, this would be so. I was kind of joking earlier. I was texting Jay saying that I wonder how bad that our collaborative novel would be.
Yeah.
But it's so fun to like read this book that I almost kind of want to do it just to see what would happen. But if we're keeping score, Nightbane lost me at chapter 4. And it wasn't until like the end of the first half that Zenith lost me, when I was like, oh wow, this heist is exactly according to plan with no twists and resolves within the first half of the book. What are we going to do for the other 200 pages? That was the first point where I was like, all right, I'm not sold on this. Everything hitherto, I was like, all right, you know, the tone is a little bit immature and I'm not totally sold on these marauders, but hey, they're still compelling. They're still interesting in their contradictions.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. I fell off slightly before you. I think I fell off during the Soyina conversation, where Dex is like, I know this super sexy plug who will have sex with me after we finish setting up a heist with her. And also she's very sexy.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's really gross. And then like she feels like a very misogynist trope. And then she like forces him into a non-consensual situation. That was about where I was like, okay, I'm starting to like lose this a little bit.
Yeah.
But that is a lot longer than it took for, like you said, Nightbane or even Wild Animus.
God, Wild Animus was page 1 for me.
For me, it was probably the moment where like they get into a fight over like how Lindy is like controlling his life all of a sudden, but like she's clearly not. Right. It's like, uh-oh.
There's something to the familiarity that I feel with these archetypes, and playing with them like dolls is a rewarding experience. And I think it has merit even as an artistic expression.
And if you imagine these characters as fighting not with swords, but like with toilet paper tubes they've taped together with duct tape, it becomes a whole lot more charming.
Yeah. That's something I kind of want to make a sweeping comment on, is oh God, this sounds like so gross to say it, but like the female energy here is really, really good in like a weird girl energy. I do kind of think of these as like weird girls having like a fun time together, and that makes it so much more charming, and it excuses probably a lot more than it probably should as a narrative, but I was just kind of willing to give it that latitude. And I didn't catch the Valen might be gay thing, but like I really appreciated that there wasn't a love triangle here, because as someone who's kind of artsy, who has a lot of platonic relationships with weird girls, like I appreciated seeing that reflected. I liked not having to think, oh God, are these two people going to kiss, and have it be like this completely like other storyline. It's much more realistic in that way.
I think I had a slightly different read on like the feminine energy of it. Like at times I found that it was like kind of binaristic, as we've already said. Like I follow what you're saying about how it's like girl power, and like that is refreshing in its own kind of way in like a genre that is so masculine coded.
Yeah.
I ultimately felt like this could have done more to like sort of like spread the empowerment around, I guess, a little bit, and be like, where is there room for like more allyship. That might just be the phytoestrogens coursing through my veins making me say that. You know, if the novel is fundamentally about like a kind of empowerment to an oppressed group, I think it could have been a little bit more intersectional.
I guess we could probably argue about this for hours because it comes down to interpretation. Yeah, it was kind of girl power to me, but it wasn't misandrist.
Oh, no,
I mean,
definitely not.
Dex is kind of like a douchebag, but like, you know, it's whatever. But like, Valen had a lot going for him. It wasn't like girls rule, boys drool, and that made it a lot more like...
No, the men are all very complex as well, yeah.
Yeah, everyone had their own kind of complexity, but it was still female-focused.
It is very female-focused. I think it's just like sometimes for me that feels like it's a little bit at the expense of other groups. Like when Nor reveals that like her prosthetic is a prosthetic and that feels weird. And then there's a moment where...
But that's not gender.
It's not gender, but it's like other marginalized groups, right? Like that's like disability. And then there's another moment where... So there's AIs in this world, right? Like Alfie. And there's a moment where Androma is like, maybe he's more sentient than I thought. And I'm like, whoa, wait, hold up. Did you not think he was sentient? Like, because he's an AI. Like, you would think that in the context of this world, which is pre-ChatGPT when it was written, the book.
Right.
You would think that, like, the common understanding of AI would be, like, a human that is a computer, basically. Like, pretty much the same thing rolled into one. And so then I was like, wait, are we supposed to, like, think of Androma as, like, a robot racist? Or, like, is it just not a common understanding in this world that robots are human?
Yeah, I don't know.
So I was just like, there could be more.
Yeah, there could definitely be more, but I just want to appreciate what's there. Because, I mean, a worse book would have been, Dex and General Cordis and Valen are all drooling moron idiots.
Yeah.
And all of our titles with awkward ESS's like, appended at the end of them, we're all the best.
We're the coolest.
Right. I don't know. I really like weird girl stuff, so I just appreciate that it's there. So I don't know.
And you're gonna go on the record saying you like weird girl stuff?
Not like that.
And that's gonna be on the internet forever?
I guess so.
Those 3 words out of your mouth?
Yeah.
In that order?
That's my contribution to the marketplace of ideas. You can take it or leave it.
I'm gonna change the tagline of our podcast on the website to weird girl stuff.
What does Knuckles the Echidna sound like?
He sounds sort of like, oh, Sonic!
Sonic, I'm Knuckles the Echidna!
It's a little too throaty.
Okay.
It's more like you're punching something.
Okay.
Little breathless.
I pleaded with them. Wait, that definitely did a plosive. I pleaded with them, Dex said now. I begged them to understand that you had made a mistake. You could never return to your home, and wasn't that enough of a punishment? But they wouldn't listen. They wanted you, Androma. They wanted General Court-Ass to have justice. They offered me money and a position as leading guardian for Arcadius. They also said that they would let my father go. If you had been there, Andy... He looked down at his boots. If you had seen the fear on my father's face in the video that they showed him, captive and bound in chains, if it were one of your marauders, and if it were my life or theirs on the line, you would know why I did it. He looked up at her now, his eyes pleading, the emotion so raw on his handsome face. I'm so sorry, Androma, Dex whispered. I will never forgive myself for what I did to you.
I hope someday he'll become Guardian of the Master Emerald again. You let chaos destroy one city, and suddenly nobody will let you guard the Master Emerald anymore.
I don't know enough about Sonic the Hedgehog to respond to that. I'm very proud of myself, actually.
You know what the top 10 most beautiful females are.
Top 10 most beautiful Zenith females.
Number 7, Soyina. Okay, Andrew, it was nice to have a longer positive section for once.
So nice.
It's been a while since we had one of those. I think on our previous episode, I even made a joke about, like, what if it just disappeared forever? But no, we're back at it. We've read a nice book that has nice things to say, even amidst some of the problems, which is what we're getting into next.
Right.
So, would you like to kick us off with something that wasn't quite working for you.
Lindsay and Sasha, why did you make the robot straight?
Oh?
I don't mean like, why did you give this inanimate object a sexuality? All robots are gay. I don't make the rules, but in sci-fi, all robots are gay. C-3PO is gay. R2-D2 is a lesbian. Data from Star Trek is gay. Why did you feel the need to make your robot straight and have a romance with the mainframe of your spaceship?
It's funny. Funny and silly and goofy.
Do we need it?
No, not at all. Not even a little.
He's funny and silly and goofy on his own. Like, yeah. I don't understand what robot romance contributed to. I intentionally left it out and sacrificed nothing in my summary.
Yeah.
And as did you, I might add.
Yeah, I did.
Because I guess he gets disassembled in the second half. But like, all the more reason to not have the robots fall in love with each other. Why is there a boy robot? Why is there a girl computer? And why do the twain meet in a heterosexual way?
It's especially weird because the computer memory is set up as like a member of the crew initially. Like, she kind of gets introduced, I think, if not in like that initial round robin chapter where all the characters are introduced, like soon after. And then as Alfie becomes like a more prevalent member of the crew, like Memory stops having dialogue at all, basically. And it's just like,
oh, that's a good point.
They're having a romance.
Wait a second. Yeah, Memory's agency as a computer is kind of at play here. Huh.
Yeah, Memory is sort of subsumed into the temple of
God.
Alfie's mind tumor.
Don't
Not
say
really.
that. Don't say that.
But, I mean, conceptually, Memory, like, stops being an entity because the ship also is, like, out of the story for, like, a bit.
Yeah, the ship, like, explodes or crash lands and then gets eviscerated or whatever. Like, I don't even know what happens to Memory, necessarily.
We know that the ship is on Arcadius by the end of the book because Queen Alara brought it back, but we don't know what condition Memory's in.
Right. So, I don't know. It's just weird. If you're willing to leave Valen being gay ambiguous, then why is C-3PO straight here? It's interesting to me. I don't even know if it's necessarily a bad thing.
Definitely something to think about. I wonder if it gets expanded upon in Zenith. Like, I'm sure it does, because otherwise Androma wouldn't have saved Alfie's memory chip. But, like,
right.
I wonder to what degree this romance is actually, like, realized, or if it's just got, like, a thing where, like, she uploads his brain into the ship and then they're together now.
Oh, wait, that's actually kind of cute. In like a San Junipero kind of way?
Sure.
Okay, I changed my mind. On the condition that in Nexus you do that, then I'm okay with it. But for right now, the robot should be gay.
He is kind of fruity, too. Like, I can't really quantify it, but he does seem a little fruity.
Oh god, am I committing by erasure?
No, I don't think so. I think it's possible that Sarah Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings have, like, absorbed the same media tropes as you and internalized them, but then tried to express them in a different way without realizing that they've absorbed tropes. So, like, he's, like, fruity. So maybe he is bi. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I double redact my statement. Either he forms a singularity with Memory in the new and improved Marauder, or he is bisexual. There are two options for how you can
Inside you,
this.
there are two wolves. One is a singularity with a female computer, and the other is bisexuality.
Those are your choices.
Mine's a little heavier, and I think you're going to disagree, because you've kind of already expressed the opposite opinion sort of implicitly. So I think that Androma's two sides, that being the, like, I love to kill, but also now I'm sad that I have killed, not really reconciling with each other, make the book really, really hard to read at times. Like, I found myself getting completely expelled by the narrative at any moment where back to back she would be like, yes, I love to stab people with my cool lightning swords. And then 10 pages later, she's like, I'm so sad that I had to kill people and everyone should feel bad for me because I am sad. It's like, please have some self-awareness as our protagonist. Like, I need you to put these parts of yourself in conversation and realize that, like, both of these, like, aspects of your sense of self are, like, serving different purposes. Like, they're both adaptive in their own way, but they are kind of irreconcilable, and I want that internal conflict to come to light, because I think that has the potential to be the driving internal conflict of the protagonist. And the fact that they are kept separate but just sort of like smashed up against each other, like waves of opposite currents colliding, causes so much internal dissonance that I'm just ejected from the book at intervals.
Yeah, no, I do disagree with that. I see how that could happen to a rational person, and I don't mean to dismiss your lived experience, but, like, okay, as a non-heavy real-life example, I hate writing. I hate writing more than anything in the world, and I'm sad about it, and I want everyone to be sad about it. But so much of my identity is pinned upon writing as an art form. So, like, these contradictions are realistic, and I'm not a writer because I'm exiled from my death sentence or whatever, but, like, I can understand how this traumatized teenager might not be 100% emotionally consistent when she's in this paradigm where she has to kill people to survive, and maybe she gets like a thrill out of it or whatever, but she's also, rightfully or not, I would say rightfully, but we can be uncharitable if we want to, and my point would still stand. She's sorry for herself because this sucks. It sucks to be Androma.
Let me refine my point a little bit because I don't fully disagree with you. I think that it's okay for her to both have moments where she's relishing the thrill of murder and moments where she's like, damn, it felt really bad to kill those people, or it feels bad now. What I want is for maybe moments in the aftermath, or it also could be moments during the fight, where she recognizes that the other part of her exists. So for example, a moment where she's really being self-pitying, but then she recalls, oh wait, but in the moment, I really enjoyed killing those people, and like, what does that say about me? Or the inverse, where it's like, I'm killing people and I love it, but then she's like, later I'm going to feel really ashamed about this. What does that say about me? Like, what is this inconsistency? And because she's a teenager, like you're saying, there doesn't have to be like a single conclusion that she arrives at that like packages the theme of the book for us in a sentence. But I do want her to have that level of awareness, because for me at least, having those two opposing sides of her just like vacillate between each other is really distracting.
I'm not trying to be obstinate here, but what you're prescribing is lip service. If Androma cuts through an action scene to say, ooh, I'm going to regret this later, I'm going to feel sad later, and/or Androma tallies off her blades saying, ooh, I really felt good in the moment, how is that different from those scenes being juxtaposed with each other in media res, in the moment?
I guess because what I'm imagining is not lip service. Like, what I'm conceptualizing is a moment where she really does feel the contrast between those sides of herself, and the narrative like gives space to really expand on how that is true. Like a page or more of self-reflection, if that's what it takes for her to be like, this is a weird thing about myself that I should probably investigate. Because like, as the novel is, she doesn't grow at all. She doesn't change at all.
No, not really. I don't disagree with the sentiment even. I'm just very concerned that would be a hat on a hat.
Okay, I think I can see that.
So I think it would be a balancing act. Maybe this is a good place for Sasha and Lindsay to accordion, see what equilibrium point feels the most natural. Because, I don't disagree. It's just, I really...
It sounds like you're hesitant to have her be more descriptive of like her own internal world, at risk of it just being more of her like making excuses for herself, kind of, and like faking it.
Well, it goes back to Suxposition. Like, I don't care what a Darawak is. I don't care if Andy is actively exploring with all of the DBT skills that she's learned, the different sides of herself and her emotional states. So, again, we could err to one side or the other. I would be really cautious if you take this advice to make sure that you're balanced. Because it could come off as more cloying.
Yeah, no, that's...
even
yeah, I could see that.
To go all the way into the extreme. It's like, oh, we can't have even one moment of triumph or one moment of sadness because they're always going to be undercut by the opposite emotion.
I could definitely see an iteration of that where the self-awareness becomes its own kind of like performative awareness. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, oh wow, I'm really gonna feel bad about killing all these people later, and like you should feel bad for me preemptively because I feel bad about it now, but I'm doing it anyway. So like,
Right.
it's like fake, right? Like it's kind of for the reader, even though there is no reader in Andy's world.
But yeah, it feels more communicative, artificially communicative. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I feel what you're saying.
Lindsay and Sasha explore what Jay's saying, but just be cautious and deliberate is all I'm saying. Kind of on the same lines of like what the narrative can handle, but moving away from the emotionality. There are at least 3 times, I would not be surprised if there were more, where the rest of the crew literally waits off screen while our POV characters do things.
Yeah.
And again, I mean literally waits. It would be one thing if they were doing peripheral support actions, but they are usually sitting around, not even talking to each other.
They might as well be in the drive-thru at Taco Bell.
They might. That would be more. Okay, wait. Yeah, that's my suggestion: is have space drive-thrus that they go to get snacks for. So, third time I said this, I wrote this book. I understand that blocking a scene with like 7 characters is fatiguing both to write and to read. It would be next to impossible to have the scene set up like they are and have every single character in the room at the time. But they could be doing something. They could be, Gilly could be crawling through the air vents. Breck could be barreling through hallways, knocking people over. I don't care. Like, you can still go back and forth so you don't have all of them in one scene, but why describe all of these diverse characters if you're not going to use them?
Yeah. I mean, so much of what happens is already unserious, so, like, why not let the minor crew members do unserious, gimmicky things on the side in the assistance of the unserious things that the main characters are doing?
Or like, okay, so what if they need to get through a door and Breck holds up Lyra like a weapon and like emotionally abuses her so her scales get so hot that they melt through the door.
And
like
she turns into like a poker.
Right? You set up all of these weird things that I want to see developed. You have a bulletproof woman, for God's sake, and she might be exposed to bullets once in the book. It's literally vestigial. They are like the appendix, the intestinal appendix of this book, and it's crazy to me that this happened.
In a very, very similar vein, Andy loses almost every fight that isn't with a grunt-level character.
Yeah.
Like, despite being the bloody Baroness, if the character that she is fighting is named, and if they've been a POV character especially, she's losing. Like, she will lose. And I'm like, damn, that's kind of a bummer for this book that's, like, kind of a girl power book. It's like, I feel like she should win some of these fights. Like, obviously winning everyone would be just as boring. Mm-hmm. But the fact that she loses all of them, by the end of the book, I was like, oh, she's about to fight Valen. I bet she's going to lose, even though Valen is, like, probably starved from years of torture.
Right.
And then she did. And I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense. But, like, I knew it was going to happen because that's been the pattern.
So that is something I will concede. That is a contradiction that I do acknowledge is like, okay, so she has this Bloody Baroness persona. Why isn't she more fearsome in person? There's all of this lip service to she's the scariest space pirate in all the world, but like you said, she loses every fight. She's not particularly physically imposing. Like, I would almost rather her be body swapped with Breck, or Soyina even was more intimidating as a concept than Andy herself. And I feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, Soyina and Breck are both way scarier than Andy for different reasons. So not to harp on Alfie, but I have one other little thing that I really need to get out of my system. And
not about him being straight?
No, not about his sexuality at all. But about his programming. Like, I refuse to buy that an AI whose sole purpose is to be like a servant to high-placed, wealthy delegates in delicate diplomatic situations. I didn't mean for all those D's to be in there. I refuse to believe that a robot in that situation would be as socially inept as Alfie is, and I realize that this is verging on like a CinemaSinsy kind of like ding, like critique. But There are so many moments where Alfie is like socially inept, but not like for his own sake. He like sabotages other people's interactions.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when Dex is jealous of Valen being closer and closer to Androma, there's this moment where Alfie interjects and says, I am detecting strong levels of distaste towards, and then Dex cuts him off.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, I recognize that this is supposed to be a gag, but a robot who is designed specifically for these like military diplomatic servant positions would not be programmed, would not be capable of like interjecting and describing another person's like interior world, especially if it would like undercut their diplomatic mission.
Right.
Right? Like, that's not too nitpicky, right? Like, that seems like very critical.
It's like if you're in like a really heated debate and then this robot comes out and is like, this guy fucking hates you. Like,
right. It's like if you're having a debate about the fate of the galaxy and a robot comes out and it's like, actually, he wants to fucking kill you. Like, right now, he's thinking about killing you with a gun.
Right.
And it's like,
no.
I don't think that robot should be able to do that.
I think in these situations, a little bit of cinema cinziness is okay. My only counter to that, and I completely agree, but to play devil's advocate, my only counter is it's kind of a trope.
It is.
I feel like Data from Star Trek was kind of like this.
Spock is like that.
That doesn't absolve it. That does not absolve it in the slightest, but I understand how our authors came by it naturally. I hate it. Like, I don't really like Alfie that much. There's no two ways about it, but...
Yeah, it's just, like, very distracting, ultimately. And, like, the gags aren't funny enough to justify it. Like, if I was really busting a gut laughing at these jokes that he makes, I would probably be okay with it. But because they're just very token, like, haha, I'm describing the absurdity of social interaction, it's like, yeah, I've seen these jokes before in, like you said, Guardians of the Galaxy and that kind of thing. Other sci-fi books where the draw is like the wacky crew on like a silly adventure.
The narrative really doesn't know how much to anthropomorphize him.
No.
Because he, speaking of the romance, he was like, memory makes my servo motors warm or something like like that, like physically describes like getting flushed, but in like droid terms, and it's gross, it's weird, it doesn't make sense from a practical engineering standpoint, it's not very interesting. Don't like Alfie is the long and short of it.
Yeah, I don't like Alfie either. It feels like they conceived of him as a gag first.
Right.
And then they didn't think about the implications.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, he really doesn't do anything, at least not in this book. Maybe in Nexus he'll pay off.
Maybe. I mean, he does, like, reveal that he has a nuclear-level gun in his arm or whatever that can vaporize.
Yeah, you want to know how stupid I am? Is I didn't realize he even had a gun. I thought he was, like, wielding the cat as a weapon, and it had, like, acid spit powers.
I didn't realize that he had a gun installed on him at first. I had to reread it, and I don't know, maybe I'm still even misreading it. Like, at first I thought he had found a gun on the battlefield and had killed the giant with that.
So departing from the concept of Alfie, I actually chose a bad thing that I think that might even be on your list. I really think this will be fun to dive into this with a MFA in poetry.
Does it involve Steven Universe? Because something later on my list does.
I hope to God Steven Universe never comes up in anything I say.
Okay, well, never mind.
Let's talk for a little bit about the extremely basic word choice issues that permeate almost everything in this book.
I think this might have been on my list. Okay, let's see which words you're talking about.
Let's start with the cataclysm. So yeah. The cataclysm is the war between Zentera and the rest of the unified systems. In what context does cataclysm denote even conflict, let alone war?
No, sounds like natural disaster.
Right, it literally comes from the Greek word for flood.
Yeah, no, it's definitely cataclysmic that Zentera like tipped to the point of planetary collapse, but the war is not a cataclysm. Agree.
On the same line, so a Arcadian noble can have a specter.
Okay.
Right?
Yes. That is true.
So, do you recall the reason that specters are so named?
Oh, no, I don't. What is it?
I'm asking you because I don't know.
Oh, I thought it was just a cool name for, like, personal bodyguard who's trusted beyond all bodyguards.
Well, that is my understanding as well. What about the word specter implies anything that you said?
So, for me, I was thinking, like, okay, specter is an associative leap away from shadow, and they are, figuratively speaking, their assigned noble shadow.
Well, then why aren't they shadows or shades or bodyguards?
No, I don't know. I mean, you're right. It didn't bother me, but you are right.
And then there's smaller stuff. Lyra, as we mentioned, has scales, and then they burn when she gets emotional. This is described as her ability.
Yeah.
In what world is that your ability?
Yeah, it seems more like a liability.
Right, my cheeks get flushed when it's cold. I don't have an ability to change the color of my cheeks. That's just part of my body.
Well, Andrew, I don't know if I mentioned this, but my eye color actually changes depending on my emotion and also the weather and
Shut
the
up!
seasons. So,
But that's not an ability.
I am able to do it when those things happen to me.
So, yeah, I think you said it best. It's a liability. Like, this sucks. Isn't it like she can't use sheets or wear pajamas because they burn when she has a nightmare or whatever? Like, I think they mentioned that.
They just need her aunt to show up and wake her up from the nightmare every time.
Right.
Designated nightmare awakener.
Yeah,
Queen
the
Alara.
literal only person who does it. That's so funny. Talk about redundancy and refrain. Alara is kind of a refrain in and of herself. But then beyond, like, pedantic definitions, there's words that create tone. I wish I had taken account of how many times they use the word screwed, because it is so freaking many. And again, it's a YA book. We have to adhere to a certain vocabulary or range of swear words. Mm-hmm. But, like, it's very toothless when Andy's like, screw you, Lunamere guards.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to cuss necessarily, but, like, the word screw is such a specifically, like, child minced oath.
Tween.
A tween minced oath, yeah, that it just doesn't do it for me.
Connotatively, it's really hard to have this, or to believe in this world where Andy is like, I kill people every single day, and every night the people that I have killed come to me in my dreams and torment me.
Yeah.
And then also she's like, screw you, prison guy. I'm gonna stab you.
Right? So, and again, I don't need her to say fuck.
Right.
But maybe, like, I'll rip out your eyeballs with my bare hands, or just something, like, really violent and messed up would be at once a service to her character and a little bit more effective as a battlefield threat than screw you, jerk. Like,
I would rather she's just, like, silent from the trauma. Like, she just doesn't have anything to say anymore, and she's like, I'm just killing them. Like, I can't even stand to think about it because I know what it's going to do to me later.
So, I mean, you can go either way with it, but just don't say screw. I think that's kind of my only suggestion there.
Okay, you actually didn't bring up any of the words that were on my list.
Really?
Which is really interesting.
Okay.
But we had the same issue. I'm worried now that if I say it, you're going to be like, I actually have a really good explanation for this, and you're dumb for thinking
Let's try it.
There's a part of the book where there's a really high density of people saying devil, hell, and angels, where I was like, the cosmology, though.
I'll give you that. I lumped that into a whole other bad thing, because, like, what the hell are the god stars? If Adherents can have their own religion, then what are god stars? What is hell? What is heaven? Like, come on.
Like, they make mention of the devil. They make mention of angels sort of like figuratively, colloquially, and then they make mention of hell also like figuratively, colloquially.
Yeah.
But the god stars are like literal deities of some kind.
Right.
And I hate to say, like, tell me what's going on, because if it was suggested in an indirect way where we were able as readers to follow it, I wouldn't want it spelled out. But the god stars, and then also all of these like specifically Christian colloquialisms, feel so dissonant. It's like weird.
Yeah, and this is kind of a place where I don't want suxposition.
Yeah.
I would want this to be specifically contrasted to the Adirans kind of, I don't know, like nature cult or whatever that they have, where they're like returning the body to nature or whatever. Do they believe in god stars? Like there's mention of the ancients who were like the primordial originators of the society that we know, but aside from that being kind of mythical, there's not really a religious aspect to that. Like, and then if you are a spacefaring society, stars do not have the same connotation of beauty and mystery that would have to us. That would just be like, oh, that's where the gas station is, and that's where the parking structure is. Like, not only did I have a hard time conceiving of the god stars, I also was like, okay, I'm sure that Andy from the most spacefaring society in this spacefaring society always wanted to dance among the beautiful stars. Like, no, that's just Portland. You know,
Right.
like, it's not the same.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, you would almost certainly think of them purely in navigational terms, like, if only for practical reasons, because, like, the gravitational pull that they would exert when you're in their orbit would probably completely alter the way that you, like, move around when you're in their orbit versus when you're, like, in, I guess, empty space. So, like, thinking of them as deities doesn't make sense, because certainly people who fly through and around their systems all the time would think of them as like waypoints.
Right.
There's nothing mysterious going on there.
But like where the Christian stuff comes from, I don't know. But hey, that could be cool world building. Maybe it's like fossilized colloquially. How many atheists say, oh my God, or Jesus Christ, or that was a miracle? Like, let's do some shaggy god stories and like have that connective tissue there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a TV tropes thing. I feel gross even saying that.
No, I like it. I think it makes sense. Like, especially if like you're saying Adira is multi-post-apocalyptic Earth and everybody's just kind of mutated, like Adventure Time style.
Sure.
It would make sense that there would be fossilized remnants of that in their language. Like, I would buy that, and I think that's even interesting. Like, it's a testament to the power of religion, even though the use of the word testament there is a testament to the power of
there you
religion.
Go.
And I think that it's a weakness ultimately that like all of these characters who are from different planets use the same religious vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, how many religions do we have on our one planet? And can you imagine then that extrapolated out to even the like 5 discrete planets that the 5 main characters come from? Like, it's
right.
It's all but impossible for me to conceive of them using the same terminology. And I know that's annoying because like what I'm kind of implicitly asking the writers to do is like come up with 5 times the world building. But I think that like at least an acknowledgement of the fact that some of the characters are not comfortable with others' conceptualization of religion is more interesting.
Would be cool.
And presents room for the characters to like feel more authentic and bond with each other and disagree with each other and like become people.
What we are not saying, I will say unambiguously, is to have Breck inexplicably be like Odin's beard at everything. Because that is absolutely what a worse author would do if they took that advice at face value. That's not what we're saying at all.
No.
But I do think it's worth a little bit of exploration.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem that I personally have with much sci-fi, like generally speaking, that's not necessarily specific to this book. It's just something that I feel like is worth saying because it's worth thinking about. It might be interesting for somebody out there who's writing their own sci-fi and is wondering how to navigate the religious angle of that. Yeah.
It's like Nova's playlist. Like, think about what these words mean. Think about where they come from. Think about the implications of all of that put together. It doesn't have to be perfectly thought out even, but just think about it. Give it some thought.
Okay, so not a religious word, but Zenith to denotate mind control goo.
I wish I had said something about that because that's completely nonsensical.
Yeah, I can't square that.
It's the zenith of your frontal lobe.
It's the epitome of goo. Like, I guess, like, it is sort of like the pinnacle of...
I can't think of more gooey goo.
If I was power scaling goo that can mind control everybody in the universe would probably be the top of the scale.
I would rather it be like Darawak or Ice Wolf, like a made-up word that's completely like unrelated to anything that is in the English language.
Yeah.
Globjar.
Yeah.
That makes more sense than Zenith.
And there is a scientist character, I think, that you like basically didn't really talk about in your summary, who is like making the goo. And I think they have like 2 heads or something like that.
Yeah, because it's just a weird scientist who's making the goo and has 2 heads. I'm sorry I didn't mention that.
No. I didn't mean that as a criticism. I was just, for context, I was saying that there is a character who could have been like, and I call it Zenith because blah, 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 blah. And then that's where they could
give
say
us like an etymology.
This is why I call it Zenith. Or the scientist could have been like, I call it mind sludge. And then Nora could be like, no, that's stupid. We'll call it Zenith because of the reason that I have for that. Right. And then we could get a reason. Because
unknown to man.
It defies sense. Do you know why Nexus is called Nexus, out of curiosity?
No, I haven't touched Nexus. I just own it. Because it was $3 on eBay.
It's interesting that everywhere on Lindsay Cummings' website and socials, at least, everything is like Zenith, New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
Nothing about Nexus, though.
If I had to guess, knowing nothing about the backstory or even having cracked open Nexus, there was probably just enough animus, as it were, left in the brand to justify a sequel. And they probably rushed it out to try to capitalize, and nothing came of it. And it died as a duology.
It was animus, but not wild.
Right, it wasn't wild enough. I don't even know, when did it come out? It came out 2019. So it was like a year later after even 365 days, probably not exactly that many. It's kind of what I thought was happening to Nightbane, but apparently we have Skyshade now, so
yeah.
I was wrong. So what were you going to tell me about Steven Universe?
Oh, okay, so this is moving into my, like, sort of fixes. Do we want to do that? No segue, we're just jumping right in. So one of the things that was most impactful for me emotionally was when Valen and Androma would have these moments where they're like, we both presently feel the absence of this person that we knew really well.
Yeah.
And even with General Cortos, that happened like once or twice, where it's like the things that connects us as characters is someone who is dead.
Mm-hmm.
That reminded me a lot of something that I really liked about Steven Universe, at least early on, before like all of the mysteries regarding like Rose were solved.
Yeah.
And that's that like a lot of the characters had different viewpoints on who Rose was, like as a person, and not like as a person in terms of like her personality,
right.
not just in terms of like who was she and what was her role in like the gem war or whatever the fuck.
Who she was to them.
Right, exactly. Like what their relationship was to her. And I really think that this book could flourish as a story that spends a lot more time exploring those nuances. Every single time we get a flashback to Kaylee, from honestly either Valen or Androma's perspective, it focuses solely on the fact that generally she was like kind of a happy person, or the moment of her death.
Right.
Like her like explosion and fiery demise. Nothing else is explored.
It's almost twee.
It is twee. It's very twee. I mean, for all of the nuance her characters seem to have, she might as well have been 2 years old.
Yeah,
like
literally.
I really wish that these people who allegedly knew her very, very well would have more diverging perspectives on who she was as a person, and like might even call to mind instances where like she was kind of a shithead or something.
Right. Like she's the daughter of like this rich guy. Like she was probably like not the nicest person in the world. I could picture that very easily.
I mean, she's basically the princess of 5 solar systems. Like she probably fucking sucked sometimes.
Right.
Like that's a lot of power to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And I know the answer is no, but just as a jumping off point, I wonder if there was a missed opportunity with Dex there, because Dex is external to all of this. And Valen is Kaylee's brother. Well, hold on, Valen is Kaylee's brother, so maybe Valen just, like, despised her. Talk about, like, teenage angst and emotions. Like,
yeah, literally.
What if that point of negativity was Valen? Valen was already kind of aloof and never really hung out with Kaylee and Andy. There's this point where Andy said that, like, she had never really had more than 2 conversations with the guy in her entire career as a Spectre.
Yeah.
What if that was less of a function of his aloofness and more he thought Kaylee was a bitch, so he never hung out with them?
Yeah, I mean, like, he spends all his time painting, so they never really saw him. And then later he learns that he's not even her full sister, he's her half-sister, and that the family member they do have in common is evil.
Right.
So, like, he has every reason to be like, I hate Kaylee.
I don't even know if it needs to be that deep, other than, like, I hate Kaylee, she was kind of mean. You don't even have to be, like, evil about it or glad that she's dead. Just, like, not everyone needs to have these twee little memories of her laughing and dancing around and saying, oh, we'll be friends forever. I love you.
Literally.
Like, it's ridiculous.
It's very silly. It feels like cartoonish. The way that she is, like, always kind of, like, energetically wearing a flower crown that she, like, sewed together herself and prancing through a woodland.
Right. That's easy. That is an easy way to net yourself a lot of narrative depth. And you don't even have to litigate it, just present the opposing views, because she's dead. It doesn't really matter. At this point, Kaylee is a symbol. So
yes.
So
yeah.
Have that diverging points. It's almost like the religion thing, you know, have these different jumping off points for these characters, and that fleshes out things so elegantly.
And you mentioned earlier the fact that these characters are teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, surely there would have been some bit of unresolved tension that was still in play when Kaylee died.
Right.
Because they're teenagers, like, surely when Kaylee died, there was some unresolved tension between them that Androma would feel bad about, right? Like, they had some fight recently, and, like, there's no conclusion to it. And, like, I can really imagine a scene where Androma is talking to Lyra, and she's like, Kaylee and I had this fight, and, like, I really hate her for this thing that she said, but, like, now she's dead, and I'm responsible for her death, and so I feel bad that I'm mad at her, but, like, I am mad at her. And, like, just the complexity of that being there, even if it doesn't really amount to anything, I think would be an immense improvement, because it would humanize everyone involved.
Jay, I'm actually really glad that you brought up stupid IPs that only annoying people like, because...
Annoying gay people, specifically.
Well, I didn't say that, but I beg you, in the bowels of the God Stars, if you have even an iota of goodwill in your heart for me, just hear me out for a couple seconds.
Okay.
Sasha and Lindsay, I think the book that you need to consult to really tighten things up here is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I am being 100% serious right now. Zenith is about a group of ragtag outlaws and murderers and mercenaries, and they are literally children. A big theme of that is their alienation from the societies that they came from. Blood Meridian is about a group of ragtag outlaws and murderers and mercenaries who have become isolated and alienated from the societies that they came from. The main character of Blood Meridian doesn't have a name. He is literally called the Kid. This is like a child in this horrifying, traumatic situation. I didn't really start to think about this until Your Half began, and they were on Adira for the stupid War is Over festival, and Gilly is playing games with the other kids. So, Gilly is a traumatized child murderer whose only non-violent social contact are these 3 equally traumatized child murderers. She should not be playing games with structured rules with other children.
Right.
She should be, at best, in the corner hissing at people and breaking shit. she should not have this level of like social ability to her. And it's not just Gilly. Breck should not want to wear pretty dresses. Lyra should not care about dresses. Andy and Lyra, they could both kind of care about dresses, I guess, but like they're not in that paradigm anymore. And it reminded me of this part in Blood Meridian where they succeed in a mission and they are welcomed as heroes into this Mexican city, and they don't know how to act among society, and they literally destroy the city by just partying too hard and burning down all the bars, and, you know, it just becomes this ruin. Like, they're like, mejor los indios. Like, I don't know which ball scene it should go in, but it should be one of them, because there's the one on Adira and there's the one on Arcadius, and they are
Well, probably Adira then, because that's the planet of like peaceful people.
Sure. So,
and these are child murderers.
Right. So I would err towards doing Adira, because we have two scenes where there's a ball and then Zenterans attack. And then we have to pretend that Zenterans totally won't attack the second time around because we need, like, tension or whatever. But, like...
Well, they wouldn't do it twice.
Right.
That would just be crazy.
Right. And I'm like, shut up, General Cordes. Of course they would. Why are you doing this? So I'm like, we need to have one scene where it's not about Zentera. It's not about the broader conflict. It's about these girls are murderers. They live their lives hand to mouth, scraping by. They would be the ones destroying Adira. It would not be this external force coming in from Zentera. They would get into bar fights, or Gilly would, like, accidentally eviscerate one of the children that she's trying to play with. Like, they don't know how to socialize. And I feel like more than, oh, I'm so sad I'm a murderer, and, oh, wow, I love murdering, my swords are so cool. This is where the contradiction / neg is. They're just like, oh, you know, I'm not really comfortable because these guys are so, like, weird and foppish. It's not like, oh, I'm traumatized because I just murder people, except for these 3 girls that I hang out with.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, without asterisks. When this particular group of people, like, collides with polite society, I think it should really be a collision.
Right.
Like, they are nomadic, roving murderers. Right. Like, they are child murderers. Like, there's no way that they could just be at the Peace Festival and have a good time.
Yeah, like, it's literally the Peace Festival. That's a good point. That's antithetical to their way of life. Like,
yeah.
That's like if Noah went to the Satan Festival.
It is. Well, he did, and then he had to run away from it because he was so incensed.
Right. So why don't they run away from it? So you don't have to, like, burn it down like, I think it was Chihuahua where they went in Blood Meridian, but, like, they could just run away from it and, like, have a panic attack. A realistic depiction of a panic attack.
Wouldn't this celebration of the end of a war, which, I mean, defined the beginning of Andy's life, and then the aftermath of that war, like, set the stage for everything she would become, like, wouldn't that be uncomfortable at least? Like,
but no,
you would think that
Breck looked so pretty in her dress, and she danced with Gilly, and there were boys watching. And I'm like, shut up. Like, no one cares. That's not what would happen.
I don't have a problem with Breck wanting to dance in a dress and, like, be a quote-unquote, and there's a lot of quotes around this, but, like, normal girl. I don't have a problem with, like, her desiring some version of that, but what I do have a problem with contextually is her being able to actualize that desire without issue. Because, like, her version of whatever that is purely imagined. Like, she does not know how to behave in that scenario.
Right.
So, like, I fully believe that she would make the situation really uncomfortable for everybody, which is actually a good thing for this book because it would create ample opportunity for, like, character development, which Breck is one of the people who most needs that in this story.
So I realize that Blood Meridian is kind of an incendiary pull here, so let's scale it back. The beach episode in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Azula is, like, trying to flirt with guys, and they're playing volleyball or whatever, and she's like, "Together we will will destroy our enemies and we will salt the earth and destroy their families, and like completely scares away like these guys that she's trying to flirt with. Have some scene like that in one of these ball scenes where we're like, okay, there is a marked difference between these people. You know, hypno-goo, bad tone, childish diction, that's something that could just be kind of buffed out, but it's these really core emotional problems that resonate so much with me and make me more frustrated at the end of the day.
Speaking of the hypno-goo and the hypno stuff in general, I don't think this book is ready thematically to tackle mind control.
No.
I don't think mind control stuff belongs in like a steamy romance story. Like, I know it is a trope, like a kink trope, but I find the non-consent of it like very upsetting.
Yeah.
And I understand that consensual non-consent is a thing, but I don't think that this is really that. Like,
no.
When I said that General Cortos, over the course of the narrative of the flashbacks, becomes Noor's mom's like sub, that is a joke, but it's also technically true.
Yeah, and his agency is just out of the question here because of the mind control thing.
Well, it's that his agency is always in question. Like, by the end of it, we know that he has some kind of ability to, like, inoculate himself against mind control from her specifically, but not fully, because he's forced to obey her command to let her go.
Right.
But then he's able to defend himself or block it out in time to kill her afterwards. So it's like, why are we making this horny? This is not cool.
Right, and I don't care about that nuance. You have already compromised the idea of consent here. There's no room for me to be like, oh, well, maybe he liked it. Like, no, that's ridiculous. That's literally problematic, not in like a soy way, but like it is literally problematic to go down this path. And speaking of problematic, I don't want to phrase it in quite this way because I don't want to imply that there's a way that it would be thematically necessary, but it's not necessary for mind control to be even a plot point, let alone a aspect of the book's sexuality. Claren could have just normally seduced him, and maybe he was just like a shitty husband and like she was hot or whatever. And Noor could have used propaganda, and I realize this is problematic in a whole other way, but like the prosthetic limb thing, that could have been the way that she sways her army to be aligned with her. You didn't need to compromise the idea of consent to have these plot points.
Yeah, and I do just want to emphasize that this is a book that sells itself as a story of, among other things, intrigue and steamy star-crossed romance. So, like, it sets the reader up to see the mind control stuff as, like, a sexually enticing element of the story, because why else include it in a book that is selling itself as a horny book? Right?
Right. It's one of those things where if there were a hypothetical situation where this could be done well, and I do believe that exists in the abstract, like I mentioned in the Not My Home episode, I really don't like prescriptivism when it comes to content. But if there were a way to do this well, I don't believe it's worth the diplomaticness and weight and length that it would require for a story that's already over 500 pages. I think the easiest solution would just be to get rid of it.
I completely agree.
Okay, here we go. What is the dictionary definition of zenith before I get into this? Zenith means...
Isn't it like pinnacle?
The ultimate, point, yeah. So I was talking about, like, what's the distinction between a mutated person, an alien person, or a body-modified person? Maybe this is, like, extreme body modification, and the goo doesn't mind control you, it turns you into a zenith, which is, like, this, like, Breck-ish giant, super strong, super soldier? What if that is a Zenith? And Zenith is not the word for the goo, it's the word for the soldiers. And then there's maybe this meta commentary of, are you good enough on your own? We have this, physically diverse group of girls. Maybe they show that, the zenith of the human race is actually everyone coming together versus this Queen Noor who wants to genetically modify everyone into perfection, which, hold on, I like this because that follows on to the whole acid rain and everyone's recovering from a war thing is hey, physically disadvantaged people, I can turn you into an Ubermensch. And that's my motivation. That's how I get everyone over to my cause. This isn't mind control goo. This is Ubermensch goo. And then we have Andy in her ragtag group on the other side of this who are we're different and we all have our own quirks, but that's what makes us stronger in the group. And there's your dichotomy right there.
Conceptually, I'm into this homogeneity versus diversity core conflict. I like this idea of
conceptually, you say?
Conceptually, our individuality working in tandem is our strength versus Noor trying to homogenize everybody.
Right.
Being a fatal flaw. Conceptually, I'm into that. I don't know if this book is ready to handle the eugenics-y comparisons that invites thematically, but I'm following you broadly, and I think that with a little bit more workshopping, this could get to where it needs to be.
So, 2 counterpoints to that. One, well, I don't think what this book needs to do is, in its current state, is glorify non-con. 2, I think if we're going to do this, the right answer is to vilify the eugenics aspect to it.
Right.
We're not going to turn Noor into an anti-hero for this. I mean, maybe she has relatable motivations, but I'm not proposing that we show that there's any credence to her belief. I'm just trying to propose this central dichotomy that makes at least a little bit more definitional sense when it comes to the word Zenith, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. No, and I don't think that that's what you're proposing at all. That's not what I was interpreting. What I was thinking was if we just sort of mapped what we had just suggested onto the book as it exists, and we already therefore have these Noor chapters where she's humanized,
mm-hmm.
I think it potentially invites readers to be oh, I kind of understand where the eugenicist is coming from. And
right.
I don't know if that's a thing that we want.
Not necessarily, no.
And also, cutting all of the Noor POV chapters out of the book fundamentally alters the narrative. So it gets messier the more that you try to fix it in that direction. But I'm still with you conceptually. I'm willing to follow this, and I'm interested in it.
I'm sorry, but just to continue to be CinemaSins, but what does it alter to cut every single Noor and Claren thing out of this? What do we lose?
We have no understanding of where the villains are coming from or what they're after, because they are the only view that we get of the state of Zenterra, at all. Without that, they just show up at random moments. I mean, they do that anyway.
Right.
But at least we know that they're kind of planning to do it. Because of their POV chapters? Would
it not be equally as, quote-unquote effective to just do Maiden Butler exposition oh, Zenterra, that place has acid rain and its palace was exploded by the final battle of the Cataclysm. Oh, well, I've heard that Queen Noor is building a secret army of super soldiers or whatever. You know what I mean? Just
I'll do you one better.
Okay.
We relocate Lunamir to Zenterra. So that the crew goes there themselves, sees the state that it's in. Maybe even Lunamir is part of the capital city, so that they're near Noor, right. Geographically speaking.
Sure, whatever.
And they see the state of things, and they're damn, this is fucked up. and then we don't have to do that Maiden Butler stuff.
Well, and at no point do we need to absolve the eugenicist.
No,
but that sort of point of view could justify that motivation, at least.
It could give us context for understanding how that viewpoint would emerge.
come to existence. Right. I don't know how much of an interesting discussion point this is going to be, moving away from the disgusting non-con and deep issues. More like pervasive surface level issues. Let's go back to what we were talking about in the intro about like what we think the ratio of Lindsay to Sasha is. So Lindsay is a more seasoned writer, and Sasha was born in like 1997, which makes her in her early 20s, if even, at the time that Zenith was published. So what do you think?
Yeah, she's the booktuber.
They both had a YouTube channel. I don't know which of them were more booktubers, but they both did have a booktube channel at one point. So regardless of what they were doing, what do you think the ratio is from older to younger writer?
Like in terms of like actual page count, like word content?
Writing influence. Let's call it something very abstract, because we mentioned there's no visible seams between chapter to chapter. Everything has a pretty consistent tone. Everything feels like it came from the same voice. Who do you think did the bulk of it, or do you think it was like 50-50? What are your thoughts?
This would have been tricky if you had asked me this morning, and it's even trickier now at night, having since seen that like documentary you sent me. So there's like this vlog documentary of this book for anybody that hasn't seen it. You can find it on YouTube. It's like 30 minutes long, and it's Sasha and Lindsay basically like doing this found footage thing where they are talking about their book tour across the US and Canada.
Right.
And there is this really interesting moment where Lindsay, who is the older writer, basically she's like, guys, I really needed this. And she basically is like, I was in a slump in my writing career. I didn't know where to go. I was feeling really stifled. And then Sasha and I collaborated on this thing, and it brought like it restored the spark of energy to my craft. And that's really interesting to me because it makes me think that this was a book that was written primarily like for these two.
Right.
For Lindsay, I think it served the role of like just being something fun and casual that she didn't feel was like quite as tied to like her personal career, maybe because it was a collaboration. And I think for Sasha, it was like dipping her toes into the water of being a writer as opposed to like primarily a booktuber.
Like a foot in the door.
So because of that, I'm inclined to think that Lindsay had slightly greater influence and that Sasha served like a more consultatory role and like gave lots of ideas, but that Lindsay did most of the actual writing.
Wow.
But that is pure speculation. And based on your reaction, it sounds like maybe you had the opposite impulse.
I had the inverse opposite reaction. And
That's
again,
so
to level set, this is pure speculation on both of our parts. This book is juvenile. I almost mean that as a positive. A child wrote this, even if it was a 20-year-old child. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
This book was not written by a seasoned hand. But there are things going on under the surface, and I almost feel like the more seasoned writer would take a step back and like do this kind of apprentice thing, kind of in a Star Wars way, where she's like, hey, this is how you do dramatic irony. This is how you do conflicting motivations for a character. Because it's these deep level things. And again, it's not Shakespeare, but it is there. The deep level things are firing correctly, and the surface level, okay, what does this word mean? What does this dialogue do to the tone of the book? That's not working. That's not working. But I bet you an older, more experienced writer was like, oh, hey, have this parallel between Lyra and Andy to show their connection, have this dramatic irony to show that they're steadily coming apart. I could see that happening a lot more. And imagining that interplay is almost more entertaining than the book itself, trying to figure out, like, who wrote this.
That is so weird because like I'm imagining like almost the exact opposite, where Lindsay is like feeling stifled by her career, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna write this book in collaboration with Sasha, and Sasha's like, oh, I have this idea, and Lindsay's like, oh my god, I have to include that, I have to work that in, and she's like writing, and then Lindsay's like popping in like, wait, what if this happened? And here's like a character that I really want to see included, and then like Lindsay's like, oh, that's so great, like I need to find a way to like go back and put that in there and then like weave it back into what already exists. It's just sort of like this free associative, like very exciting, very free-form process that I'm envisioning. But like I also could completely believe like what you've pitched as well. Like who knows?
So you envision that Sasha is kind of being used as an aegis for Lindsay to like express all of these freeform, like you said, ideas that are just kind of off the cuff, and she's taking it by the seat of her pants and seeing what comes out, and she's like, oh, well, you know, it's this 20-year-old writer that's helping me, you know, that's where that's coming from.
I could imagine a version of reality in which this more seasoned writer uses the collaboration with a younger writer as a reason to be less strict in her own process, because that's what she personally needs at that moment. And I don't say that to suggest that like she's being disingenuous by saying that she needs that at all. I think that like she probably legitimately like felt stuck and needed the sort of jarring experience of having somebody else like get in on her writing process to make her realize what was no longer working.
100%.
And I think that it didn't really produce like a cohesive story, but I think it probably produced something that like for both writers was personally very, very useful. That's
kind of what gives me such a soft spot for Zenith, is that as an exercise, this is very cathartic. And again, I have seen this, I have written it, you have written it, Jay. There's something to the exploration of writing as a craft, and maybe this was like a vicarious thing, kind of the same thing as you. I'm like, okay, I can see where you're coming from with your theory. My only counterpoint is, why does it feel like a child wrote this?
I haven't read any of either of their other stuff, so I really have nothing to compare it to. I'm totally taking a shot in the dark.
Right, and neither have I, so we're both kind of just guessing here. I'm going off the basics of diction or whatever, but...
And having heard both of them talk, like, basically only in that documentary that I watched, they don't sound, like, so markedly different that I can notice either of their sort of, like, patterns of speech or ways of thinking in this book.
It kind of goes back to what I was saying about like how this just feels like a sleepover between a couple of weird girls, like trying to imagine their spaceship or whatever. In that same vein, it just feels like a couple of weird girls writing a book together, and that's not to discount it. In fact, it's much the opposite. I would rather see something like this come out than Rich Shapiro's disgusting Fantasy of the Week come out. Like, this has so much more value as a work of art or even a thought experiment than anything Rich Shapiro's made.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Rich Shapiro, I mean, what was that phrase that he used in that little show he put on like last week? He was like, I embodied the spirit of Southeast Asia and Malaysia in my most recent story. I was like, bro, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
That doesn't mean anything, and you didn't.
God, I would so much rather, like, friends just have fun and write kind of mediocre books 1,000,000 times over than one more Rich Shapiro book.
Right.
Get out there.
And that's the tragedy of it. I don't want to get on like my feminist soapbox and say that it might be like a function of misogyny or whatever, that this book has been lambasted en masse. I won't say the word review bomb because I legitimately think that this is not a good book, and the people that don't like it have a good reason to not like it. But I will say, you know, maybe people are more inclined to go out of their way to express negativity about this, whereas billionaire Rich Shapiro gets to gallivant around being disgusting and no one stops him.
I also agree in the sense that, like, I think it is very possible that there are people that have disliked this book to an unwarranted degree because of like the
every booktuber ever.
Yeah, because it's like women writing it. And at the same time, I don't think it's true that it's been review bombed, because on Goodreads it has like 3.5 stars. Like, I don't think you can say something's been review bombed if it has that positive of a rating. Like, that's a pretty mid rating, you know? Mm-hmm. And like, none of the reviews, the negative reviews that I read, although I disagreed with many of them, none of them that I saw really stunk of like, I'm mad that women wrote a book.
Sure.
They were just like, I didn't like this because one of the characters had scales.
Right.
And then I was like, why is that bothering you?
Reason. You know what? Sorry, I'm not taking pot shots at an 8-year-old video or whatever. Caleb Joseph never mentioned the non-con, which I find kind of weird. But no, we have to think about, what's a Darawak? That's so stupid. Like, shut up. Shut up, dude. Like,
the internet was a very, very different place back then.
I almost miss it, and I definitely don't. But that's the world that we live in.
All across Arcadia, silver explosions of hypno goo raise down from the skies. Do I need to say anything else? It's basically what happens. The enemies of Zen Terra turned their eyes to the sky, smiling as they thought of their new queen. An evil, long thought dead, had been reborn. A queen without power had taken up her new throne, a prince of compulsion at her side. And far away, hidden within the swirling colors of a nebula, a general in a glass starship died. The Bloody Baroness took his place. Okay, Andy, that's Andrew, not Androma. I'm hearing from our captain right now. It sounds like we have re-entered orbit and we are about to land in our conclusion. So as we sort of touch down on the end of this episode, is there any final thought that you would like to share with us, the St. Battlestar University English Club?
Well, I've been more excited for this than a Darawak on the mountains of Solus hopped up on Moonchu, but I do think that we've about exhausted the subject. I just can't overstate my joy that this was just a bad book. And by bad book, I mean this was a book that failed in certain core goals that it had. Goals that could be refined and methods that could be fixed. If I could do anything other than what we've done for the past 2 hours, I would go back in time and just tell you not to think about all these people who have been so mean, because the things that shine in this book far outweigh the things that are silly or stupid. There are certain things that absolutely have to go, but what I mean is the emotional core here, the idea of all these girls having adventures together, the traumas that they undergo and how they square that with their identities. All of this is so interesting to me. And I would not have picked up this book had I not believed in that mission that you guys had. And by process, our mission to make sure that this book doesn't pass into obscurity without someone mentioning that, no, the internet is wrong. These are good things. The bad things are elsewhere, but the good things here are worth preserving, or at least worth talking about.
There are definitely good things in this book that I think have been left out of the conversation. In many ways, I think this is a quintessentially, like, quote-unquote bad internet book in that it fails to, like, meet its own ambitions in many ways. Yes. Like, it's kind of failing on its own terms, right? Like, the problems with it are not that it's, like, not literary enough or that it's too snacky or something. It's that it sets out to do, like, certain things romantically and thematically, and it doesn't do them. And the good news is, I think, is that is very fixable, because it indicates that, like, the author had a vision, or the authors in this case had a vision, and, like, that vision could be realized with some edits. Many edits maybe, but, like, it's doable. Like, it is a humanly achievable feat.
100%.
As opposed to, like, a Wild Animus, which I will continue to say is an ontologically evil book that wishes only bad things into the world and should not exist.
Right.
And I think that being this book is a beautiful thing for that. Like, it's just a record of a vision not realized, which provides so many opportunities to imagine what it could have been like if it had been.
What is that, your memoir title? A Record of a Vision Not Realized?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that makes me feel real good.
No, but I 100% agree. And that I find more compelling. I think ever since I first broke the subject in the Noah Men of Destiny Remnants, whatever.
Princesses of Earth Volume 1.
Princes of Earth Volume 1. I don't care. I think every time, and I shouldn't, but I do. I think every time about whether or not a book deserves to exist. In terms of its mission or its literary quality or some other ephemeral aspect of it. This emphatically deserves to exist, deserves to be bettered, and deserves to be sent out into the world in probably a more thought out terms, but in concept, it's still there. Again, nothing that Rich Shapiro has ever written deserves to be put out into the world. I don't really know why the booktube thing faded out for both of you, but I hope it wasn't the backlash. But I hope that this little bit of constructive criticism can do something for someone, even if it's just the girl listening to this who wants to write a weird book.
No, I think that honestly, if there's the potential to help anybody, it's that individual that maybe this episode could help. And gender aside, like you've said, both of us have
gender neutral.
Girl/neutral. Both of us do have this book, and I think every writer writes this book, and I think that that's good. And as I said, of the hard drive novel, maybe even necessary. Mm-hmm. And I think that the key here is maybe just recognizing when you've written that thing that you don't share, not because it's bad, because it's not it's not categorically bad. I mean, it is bad, but there are redeeming qualities to it. It's just that it's not it's not the kind of thing that the literary world needs to see. What I'm saying? It's not yet complete.
It's a good thing to get out of your system.
Yeah. And maybe you need to get out of your system. Maybe you can't write anything else until you've written your fun romp with all of your OC Do Not Steal characters. I think it's important to be able to recognize when that's what you've written.
I hate that it took us till the end of the episode for me to get to this point, but it really, really is the proto-Lightlark. Lightlark in space, whatever you want to call it. These guys were we have a book idea. We have a book idea. It's so awesome. And it is an awesome book idea. But then the publisher was okay, I'm a big name publisher, traditional publisher, give me your manuscript. And they did at let's be charitable and say draft 2. And it sucks, Yeah. It has a lot more that needs to be polished out, and they have damned themselves. And I don't care how many latte arts that you buy and post on your Instagram story, Alex. I think that Lightlark is doomed to obscurity by virtue of its mediocrity, much in the same way Zenith is. And I do feel worse for Zenith than Lightlark, for no particular reason other than I liked Zenith a little bit more from the starting gate.
The pitch is better.
We're still seeing this pattern of victims of just people who weren't ready to make this huge step and were chewed out because of it. And on one hand, I don't want to say they had it coming.
They don't deserve that harshness of criticism, but the book is
bad,
worthy of a critical response.
Yes,
they don't deserve to be personally attacked.
No, I know what you're saying. I think that this book deserves to be disliked. But if this is the reason that they don't do booktube anymore, that is a tragedy.
Yeah,
that is
bad.
A crying shame. And I legitimately feel horrible about that.
Yeah, because this is evidence of, you have said, both skill and talent. There's craft here, there's passion here, and there is potential for a lot of growth here. The problem is that it was published.
Right. That's kind of the problem with all of these, isn't it?
There are times when I feel bad criticizing these books at all, because I look at them and I think this shouldn't be published. I shouldn't have access to this. This isn't ready for me to look at it. And I feel part of the problem for offering an opinion. And then I also kind of feel like part of the problem for saying that it's not ready to be published, as though like I have the authority to suggest that. But I really think that in such an unfinished state, this book and some of the others that we've looked at, like, they're not cohesive or coherent enough
right
to be out there. And they have the potential to be much better if they had been given the opportunity to cook longer.
Therein lies the distinction. We're not authorities on this subject, you nor I, but we're not saying, oh, this shouldn't have been published because what's a Darawak? We're saying, like, hey, there are some core issues with certain ethical concerns that went completely unaddressed in this book that I think can only be construed as not good. So maybe you want to look at that. I feel comfortable flattering ourselves to say that we can make those kind of calls. Ultimately, I did have fun with this. It was a slog to read, but Jay put it best. They told me, they didn't really like reading it, but once it all kind of sunk in, their opinion kind of softened.
Yeah, dead ass, the first half of this book was probably the worst 225 pages I've had to read for this podcast in terms of like how personally difficult I found it. The non-con, the constant flashbacks, the shallow characterization of many of the background characters. I was so worried that it was just going to languish in this for the whole time. But thankfully, some stuff did happen in my half that made it feel like there was enough to really sink my teeth into and talk about. But man, that first half was bad. As a reading experience, I mean, not that like the first half was categorically worse than anything we've read on the show.
Right, no.
That is not what I'm saying at all. Just the experience of it for me personally was probably my least favorite.
For sure. And the fact that you were able to overcome that, dear authors, says something, you know?
Yes.
A worse author would not be able to recover from that.
But no, in the second half, the pacing does get better. There are moments that I really appreciate. And yes, that is definitely not true of most of the books that we read on this show. So,
which is so funny because I hated the second half. So our opinions diverged, which in and of itself is another good example of how this is actually a good book ultimately.
Worth talking about.
We can form different opinions about it.
Yeah. And I think we've had some really, really good conversations on this episode in particular.
For sure. So will we ever get to Nexus? Probably not until next season at the earliest. Jay's shaking their head like this may never happen. But I may one day. And you guys are now permanent members of the English Club, so I just want to welcome you. Please don't sit next to Norm or Rich Shapiro for your own good. But J.A. Johnstone or Lanny Sarum, actually. Yeah, Lanny's a good safe bet for you guys.
Just be careful if she brings in any lemonade.
I'm glad to have you here, but I think our time is running short. I guess I've been Andrew.
And I've been faster than a Darawak on a tin roof in a summer day in Adira.
Hey, that's good world building. See, I don't need to know what a Darawak is to understand the metaphor, Caleb. But regardless, we have been the SBU English Club podcast. Like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, depending on whatever platform that you're on. It really means a lot to us, and I do meticulously watch all the feedback that we get, because like the goals that we have for these books, we want to improve ourselves. Our coffee is open if you're listening to us on YouTube. Our super thanks are open if you want to support us. But regardless, we will see you next time with probably a more heavy and complicated book that honestly, after how fun this was, I'm not looking forward to, but you guys will get something out of it.
Oh no.
So with that out of the way, we will see you guys around campus.
See you around campus.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.